Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 59, Liberation. Hecate exerted her divinity. A profound aura erupted from her, sweeping across the Western world like a frothing tsunami. Rumble. The very fabric of reality shook slightly, saturated with divine magic. The chaotic commotion drew the divine gazes of gods and goddesses, but none dared to intervene as the auras of sun, night, and stars shrouded Delphi like the brightest and strongest protective blanket of the cosmos. The very magic glistened. The wizards and witches felt a call deep within their souls and minds. It was enticing and soothing, like a mother's embrace. And, heeding the call, they closed their eyes and immersed themselves in the said embrace without hesitation. The magic in their cores boiled, extending like a thread of light from their figures, and it connected with the divine magic shrouded in reality, returning to their origin and genesis. It all began to return to Hecate. And she clearly felt it. Every shard and piece of magic in every being. They bear her will and divinity. In her mind, they were the brightest stars within the eternal darkness. Hecate began to weave the magical threads together, meandering them all into the fabric of reality itself and bringing them back to her, their origin and genesis. It was far more torturous than she had expected. The reality was passively resisting her, attempting to obstruct and interfere with her weaving as if it couldn't accept the change she had brought about. It attempted to disrupt the magic, intending for it to regress into chaos beyond her control. She was only able to keep her magic under total control by utilizing all of her divinity. Reality, on the other hand, used this opportunity to undermine her with her weaving of magic, unraveling her progress. Noticing this, Hecate had to divert some of her attention away, and she began to battle reality on both sides. She desperately clutched the magical threads with her hands. And she bled, her hands dripping with golden ichor, into eternal darkness. Hecate squeezed out all of her will and power, and, gradually but steadily, she was gaining an advantage by attempting to strike a balance with reality. She continued to weave her magical threads into the fabric of reality, fighting it with all her might. Hecate wove slowly, her bloodied hands trembling in pain and her figure quivering in agony. But she didn't give up, despite the excruciating pain coursing from her hands through her body, filling every pore. It was like somebody had submerged her within the explosion of a supernova, tearing her body apart slowly. Hecate sewed and melded the weave, bearing the unbearable pain with fortitude. This was her path. This was her dream. This was her hope. With that thought, the figure of Apollo emerged in her darkened world, where she was present, floating in the middle of a massive and colossal web. Her bloodied hands held a plethora of shimmering threads that extended into infinite reality, weaving into it under her control. Hecate paused at the sight of Apollo, her weaving ceased and her forming web of magic darkened, as if about to collapse. The figure of Apollo was blurry and brilliant, bathed in soft light. And he embraced her, his hands cupping her cheeks. "You've got this. Break your limit and ascend. Believe in yourself, my love." He kissed her, sealing his warm, scorching lips against her cold, icy lips. Immediately, his form disintegrated into millions of streams of light, coursing into her. Hope filled her heart, infusing her with infinite strength and power. "Apollo," Hecate murmured, closing her bright eyes and savoring the warm taste on her lips. His gentle words echoed in her mind over and over, instilling strength and power in every fiber of her being. And she continued, opening her eyes, brimming with confidence and faith. Hecate weaved the threads of magic into reality, her speed increased and increased, crashing through the resistance of reality with her newfound strength. Boom. And it shattered into pieces and shards like it was nothing more than a fragile piece of glass under her power. Her weaving was unhindered and unimpeded, as she had destroyed reality's resistance. And so her ascension truly began. Time ticked on. Seconds turned into minutes. Minutes turned into hours. Hours turned into days. The web of magic that encircled her grew and stretched into the infinity of reality, connecting and joining with the shards of magic, forming a complex weave interlacing with the fabric of reality throughout the Western world. Finally, she wove the last threads, connecting everything back to their beginning, their genesis, to her. She felt it at once. The control over her magic. It will always be completely under her control, no matter how far it evolves, how many uses it, or how large it expands. Her will, power, and divinity were all absolute. For the rest of eternity, no one can tamper, tinker, or corrupt her control. Crack. The sound of something breaking reverberated in her ears, thundering into her mind. Tears immediately welled up in her eyes, streaming down her cheeks, as the feeling of liberation for which she had so long yearned filled her soul, body, and mind. She did it. She had broken the limits of her divinity. She can now freely walk on her path of magic. And her dream doesn't have to end here. Hecate brilliantly smiled, a smile that told volumes of her joy and relief. Then, her vision darkened and her eyes dimmed. Praise thy. A cacophony of noises suddenly broke through the eternal darkness. She heard everyone's prayers for her, and their concern, worry, piety, and reverence reached her heart. It was disjointed and disoriented, but it all soon fell into place, resounding as one in her mind. Lady of Mysteries. Hecate had ascended to become the source. A pair of warm hands immediately embraced her tightly. Apollo. She thought with relief, and she collapsed into darkness, drained and weary. After what seemed like an eternity, Hecate opened her eyes. She looked around right away. She was lying on a bed in a dimly lit room illuminated by starlight. Apollo sat on the chair next to her, holding her hands. He had a hand on his chin, his eyes closed, and his brows furrowed. You've finally woken up. Apollo whispered, opening his eyes. How long have I been out? Hecate asked, her hand on her head, still trying to get a grip on reality. 2 days, Apollo replied as he rose from his seat. 10 if we include your ascension. 2 days. Hecate frowned. That long. You have nothing to be worried about, my love. Apollo, who was sitting next to her in bed, reassured her. I had checked. Your body was just adapting to the changes brought by the ascension and breaking your limits. Ascension. Hecate murmured, and she immediately exerted her divinity, gazing out at the world. There it was, with her at its center, a purple web that interacted with the fabric of reality across the entire Western world. It was her weave of magic. I did it. Hecate stared at her hands in a daze. I really did it. Apollo embraced her. Yes, you did. You have become the source and have broken the limits on your divinity. Hecate returned his embrace with quivering hands. Thank you, Apollo. Tears trickled down on the shoulders of Apollo. Thank you for the hope. Apollo stepped out of her embrace and cupped his hands against her cheeks. He then stated it firmly. Please do not thank me, my love. You were the one who broke through it all. Hope was always present in your heart. I just made it burn brighter. It still doesn't deny what you did, Apollo. Hecate leaned in, exhaling. Thank you for everything. I honestly don't know where I'd be without you in my life. You are Hecate, the goddess of magic, the creator and ruler of the weave, the source of magic, and the lady of mysteries, Apollo declared, bumping his forehead against hers. He indicated her heart. Never ever forget that, my love. I won't, Apollo, Hecate said as she kissed him, their warm and icy lips melding heavily under the stars. After what seemed like a lifetime, they parted ways. Come, rest your head on my lap, Apollo said with a coy smile. Hecate obliged, lying on his lap. How do you feel now? He asked, gently caressing her hair. I feel. She drawled, as if looking for the right word. Her eyes gradually became emotional, and she sighed. Liberated. Isn't it good? Apollo inquired softly. Yeah. Hecate nodded repeatedly. More than anything. Apollo kissed her on the cheek. I know. So? Hecate asked after a moment of comfortable silence. What happened when I went out in the cold? I didn't cause any big problems, did I? Your ascension caused quite a stir. Apollo laughed and patted his chest. But nothing I couldn't bear for my love. Hecate smiled at his sincere yet boastful words. Then I dragged my mother to meet your mother, and they talked. Apollo continued. How did it go? Hecate pressed her lips together with concern. It went much better than I expected. Apollo smiled, they reconciled after they fully heard each other. It is great. Hecate muttered, relief washing over her. Our family can finally be one. I'm sorry, my love, Apollo said abruptly. Why? Hecate inquired, puzzled. I should have waited for you to do this. Apollo gazed up at the night sky. We vowed to mend our family together. Oh. Hecate burst out laughing, caressing his cheek. Apollo. How can you be so adorable? Apollo gave her a sour look, but his lips rose to form a betraying smile. Apollo. Hecate finally spoke, her laughter dying away. It's fine. Apollo's smile broadened, then he kissed her cheeks. Now, my love, go to sleep. I'll go tell aunt and mother that you're awake. Hecate nodded and rose from his lap. And she watched him walk away with teary eyes. Don't leave your bed, as your body is still recovering. If you want anything, please just call me, I will immediately come. Apollo's whisper sounded in her ears. Hecate smiled. I am not hearing a reply. I will, Apollo. Hecate sighed, lying on the bed. Now, go. Apollo hummed. 15 minutes later. Apollo, Leto, and Asteria strode down the long corridor to the final room. Is she truly fine, Apollo? Asteria inquired once more, her voice strained with worry. Yes, Aunt. Apollo answered patiently, as they neared the door to the room. She just needs some rest. Then she will be back on her feet in no time. Asteria hastily nodded and opened the door, entering the room. Leto followed her, but she came to a halt when she noticed Apollo standing motionless, his eyes fixed on the night sky. Are you not coming, son? Leto inquired. You both go first, mother. Apollo said. I'll join you later, I have something I need to attend to. Leto nodded and strided into the room, closing the door behind her. In silence, Apollo turned and walked towards the balcony at the end of the corridor. As he approached the balcony's edge, the night shone with millions of stars. Nyx, he called. You can come out now. Nyx manifested. Apollo, you have such sharp eyes. Apollo said sharply. Small talk isn't necessary. State your purpose, Nyx. I'd like to speak with you about something very important. Nyx revealed, getting straight to the point. What a surprise. Apollo said, though his calm expression betrayed his words. Me too, Nyx. Nyx chuckled. Darkness hustled in and shaped a dark table with 2 chairs. And they took their seats in silence, facing each other in a moment of heavy silence. Apollo spoke, shattering it. You should know the coming war of the gods. The one you'll most likely begin. Nyx spoke gently. Yes, Apollo, I do. Apollo continued. The gods will not be the only ones fighting in the war. The primordials will eventually join, it is inevitable. Nyx hummed. Apollo took a deep breath, his calm tone hardening to one of sincerity. So, Nyx, I invite you to join me, to become my ally. That's unexpected. Nyx furrowed her brows. You didn't trust me at all with little Hecate. And I still don't. Apollo said pithily, crossing his fingers. But there's no need to bring that to the table right now. Go on, Nyx said, intrigued. Our alliance will be based on mutual interests and benefits. Apollo then revealed, placing all of his cards on the table. This is also why you've come to meet with me. You should have noticed at least my differences and decided to bet on me. You gave me hope. He pointed at her. Nyx fell silent for a moment as the darkness ringed her like shimmering, glistening veils. Then, she acknowledged with a nod. Yes. So, what true benefit can you provide me? She inquired bluntly, laying all of her cards on the table as well. Apollo met her eternally dark eyes. Nyx, your divine path. You maybe be a primal being, greater than the gods. However, you are still inextricably linked to this universe. You are only the night and the first darkness of this universe. The night sky became heavier. Darkness blanketed numerous galaxies, dimming billions of stars throughout the expanse of space. Apollo continued, unabated by surging Nyx. However, if you decide to join me, you might be able to find a way to break free and achieve liberation. Might. Nyx cocked her head. You're not certain, are you? Apollo stated. This is something even I am unfamiliar with, Nyx, but I can nearly guarantee you will be able to find it. Do you fully understand what you are asking of me? Nyx said, her voice raising a pitch. The night sky became even darker. The galaxies dimmed even more. You actually want me to take a leap of faith in you? Yes, Apollo said firmly, rising from his seat and reaching out a hand to her. Just like I am taking it in you. In a sunken and heavy silence, their bright and dark gazes met. Finally, Nyx rose from her seat, her gaze fixed on the room of Hecate, and then it passed to his hands. The light and darkness shook hands together. Chapter 60, Apollo. Name, Phoebus Apollo. Birth, July 7th, honorific titles, Eternal Blazing Sun, God of the Sun and Light, Master of Order, Giver of Life, Ethnarch of Music, Forebear of Art, Bringer of Hope, Patron and Creator of Humanity, Progenitor of Languages, Bringer of Twilight, Morning Lord. Nicknames, the Breaker, the Changer, the Anomaly, the Chosen, the Origin, my Son, the Cruel Son, the Blasphemer, the Men of Miracles. Authorities, Sun, Light, Order. Divinities, Music, Art, Language, Hope, Prophecy, Divination, Poetry, Healing. Status, Divine Being. Power Level, Tier 3, B, Multiple Galaxy Level. Weapon, the Sun Invictus and the Spear of Eternity. Affiliations, Olympus. Divine Residence, Delos. Organization, Temple of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. Type, Faith, Secret, Knowledge and Military. Symbol, the Blazing Sun Headquarters, Delphi, Trier. The highest principles of Apollo's holy rites were volition and impartiality. He commanded the faithful to encourage and exemplify acceptance, equality, and understanding, to treat all other beings as equals, and to make all welcome in the faith. Let all on whom my light falls be welcome if they desire to be so. As the golden sun waxes and wanes, so too does all life. Trust in my eternal radiance, and know that all who live in love under my light shall know my blessing. Turn to the sun, and I will be your true guide. The words of Apollo, with which all novices were guided. Novices in the Apollonian temples were called the awakened, while clerics were known as dawnbringers. The full priests took a new name in his service when they were ready to signify that Apollo personally recognized and accepted them. This new name could either be used instead of their old name or simply be used only when addressing other dawnbringers and when in solitary prayer. All of Apollo's clergy respected art, liberty, nature, and culture, promoted betterment of oneself, and strove to bring hope to their followers and others. Many of these followers worked in various creative arts. Order. Clerical orders. Brotherhood of the Glorious Sun, an order of knights and clerics that later dedicated themselves to the belief in the eternal sun. Military orders. Company of the Singing Dawn, a mercenary company of bards and adventurers based out of Trier that promoted worship of the eternal blazing sun and took on missions that aligned with his holy sites. Order of the Aster. An order of knights that exemplified the most conservative tenets of the faith and safeguarded its temples across the Western world. They served as the de facto army of the temple. Power, initiates and other clergy of the Apollonian faith were granted immediate use of magical spells that involved the manipulation of light. While dawnbringers were far more adept than clerics of other faiths at turning undead, crusaders of Apollo were notably not granted this ability but the manipulation of order. Activities. Spreading hope and enthusiasm is your holy task, your life's work, and your daily salvation. Words of Castor, the Angel of Dawn. Priests offered a wide variety of services to their parishioners, including marriages, births, funerary services, and even public announcements of new public works projects. Apollonian temples often sponsored non-combative athletic events, such as wrestling, archery, riding, running, swimming, and the like. They also honored creative competition in the arts, including the arts such as literature. More often, local clergy hosted grand revels for forward-thinking scholars and intellectuals in order to stimulate their creativity and inspire new ideas that would further advance culture and civilization across the Western world. Priests of the eternal blazing sun often concerned themselves with new business ventures, offering loans to business people seeking more startup capital than their neighborhood moneylender could offer. Some of them took this entrepreneurial spirit even further, becoming investors, merchants, and financial brokers for their own personal enrichment. They were often viewed as overly enthusiastic hucksters. Yet other priests chose to propagate more humanistic unions, serving as matchmakers to prospective lovers who had yet to find their partners. Faith, the believers of the eternal sun considered cycles of growth and renewal, especially with regards to the natural world. They greatly valued beauty, culture, and art, taking delight in the wonders of Apollo's glory. Rituals, befitting Apollo's title of Morning Lord, rituals, ceremonies, and daily prayers led by his clergy were held at dawn each day. Formal unions, such as official contracts or marriages held during that time, were considered especially blessed. An additional prayer to Apollo was held by some temples at Hyson each day, and was considered a solemn but joyous rite of the faith. A ceremony known as the going down was performed at funerals, which were always held at dusk. Chapter 61, The Years. A/N. I originally planned to do a Greek mythology arc with famous Greek demigods like Cadmus, Perseus, Atlanta, Jason, and so on. How the existence of Apollo affects them in history. Through this, I wanted to do a lot of world building. I introduced Cadmus in the last chapter just for this. He will go on a quest with Apollo's knights and Hecate's wizards to the neutral territory between Asgard and Olympus to slay the divine dragon. There, they will confront Brunhild and at the same time, Apollo will confront Hela. It was my original plan for the next few chapters. However, I decided to change the course of the story to speed things up, scarping most of the Greek arc. Recap: Apollo began creating his offshot version of Blue Lanterns. He had finished laying part of the foundation for his project, leaving the rest to his angels to complete to test and help them grow in their paths, not because he was lazy and wanted to see Hecate. Hecate had ascended to the source, leaving her mark on the origin of magic, which was a feat only achieved by Osther, Mother Magic, and Thon, the true god of chaos, and successfully gained their undivided attention. Hecate also broke the restraint on her divinity and gained the divinity of mysteries through her ascension. Meanwhile, Nyx and Apollo faced each other and formed an unlikely alliance. Light and darkness shook hands, mirroring the beginning of everything. The light of the sun rolled through stained windows, bathing the room in an auric glow. There were a few bookcases with a blazing sun emblem flanking the walls. The earth was projected from the platform on the far side of the room, shimmering with specks of light. The walls were covered in notes detailing the activities and information of the temples of the eternal blazing Sunday. A short silver table in the center held parchments and books stacked on top of each other. Apollo sat back in his chair, his hand on a file detailing the issues and activities of his religion. His other hand was holding a slice of pizza to his mouth, relishing it as he studied the changing information on the report. It's been 6 months since Hecate's ascension. Nyx and Astoria departed for the underworld, bestowing their final blessings on them. He and Hecate then went back to their normal lives, advancing on their divine path, researching magic and science, dabbling in art and crafting, answering their believers' prayers, performing their divine duties, and, of course, having sex, lots of sex. It was content and cozy, everything Apollo could have wanted. It was times like this that he felt most supported. It was like a ray of light in the middle of a dark and forlorn path against the wretched fates. Fates. The kindly ones. The mere thought of them made his heart erupt in volcanic rage. 20 years. It has been 20 years since the evils have wreaked havoc on the world. He had accomplished a lot in such a short amount of time. The most important of all was his strength, which had risen to multiple galaxy level. But he still felt short whenever he faced his father. It was simple for him to deduce the reason for this: Zeus was becoming much stronger despite not expending any effort. It was almost as if someone were assisting him in breaking cosmic rules and fraud his way through his divine path. The fates were to blame. It had to be them, the cosmic hags who believe they have complete control over everything and everyone beneath them, and he had burst their bubble of delusion, bringing them to their knees in front of the entire multiverse. To be honest, his inference did not surprise him. After what he had done to them, he expected retaliation from the fates. But anticipating it is one thing, confronting it is quite another. His grip on the file became tighter. His mottled, golden eyes sparkled. Apollo had no idea how much he would have to pay this time to keep fate from interfering with events. Calm down, Apollo. Focus. He took a deep breath. First and foremost, he must find out the plan of the fates. Remaining blind in the face of the kindly ones will almost certainly result in death, and death in a gruesome way at that. So Apollo got to work. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He started recalling everything that had happened, searching his memories for even the smallest hints. If he found a lead, he would follow it into destiny, scrying through the past, present, and future. He entered the realm of possibilities, analyzing millions, if not billions, of possibilities in his mind in order to find the answer to the impossible in the ocean of these seemingly infinite possibilities. However, Apollo had an advantage over the fates. It was his meta-knowledge. In his previous life, he had learned and read about the kindly ones in Sandman comics. At first glance, it didn't appear to be much of an advantage to him, given who the fates were. But he soon had a gut feeling about it. And he trusted his intuition, which spared him from making risky judgments and mistakes by giving into his voracious curiosity. Trust him, he makes a lot of that with his research into science and the cosmos. Oh, his research into science had been fruitful. With the exception of two-way foil, he had completed all of the necessary theoretical valuations and calculations for others. That dimensional reduction weapon is still bothering him, with only 75% of the research on it completed. And he decided not to stop there, wanting to advance the technology to the point where it could affect even the mightiest cosmic entities. Even now he is in the domain of one of them. That thought only increased his dread over the power of cosmic entities. But in this situation, there was really nothing he could do about it. He needed to investigate the possibilities, so he couldn't really avoid the Queen of Nevers, who embodied all the possibilities of the infinite multiverse. It's an insane and ridiculous decision. However, Apollo was all about getting into it, considering most of his future enemies will be cosmic entities. If he does not begin preparing now, his death in the future is almost certain. But suppose he did die, who would he meet in the end? Would it be the death of the Endless, the god, or even Lucifer Morningstar himself, or just nothing at all? Whoa, Apollo, that's a depressing thought. You should really start working on your pessimism. Apollo sighed. He exited the realm of possibilities. He can't continue with pessimism, as it will lead to nothing but failure. He took another slice of pizza from the table and began munching it. He let his thoughts fly to distract himself from his heavy heart. Though not everything about the last few years has been depressing, his little sister had ascended to become the supreme goddess of the moon. She challenged Chang'e, the moon goddess of the heavenly court. The battle took place in the Ilios, the same stadium where he fought Quetzalcoatl. It has become quite famous for divine battles over the years. Hephaestus has been making fortunes out of it. During their duel, Apollo willed his son Chariot to circle the stadium with golden banners. Artemis, the silver goddess, little sister, thrash her into the sun, and I will take care of the white rabbit, pulverize that little rabbit into oblivion. Despite his super-motivating slogans, Artemis and Chang'e were still fighting for a foreseeable tie, with neither side having an advantage over the other. Noticing this, his little sister started to finally get serious with the white rabbit. It was her divine form of Chang'e. Through the years, Artemis has been working on archery, inventing numerous methods and attacks with that weapon, so much so that she gained divinity out of it. And she used her archery divinity in conjunction with her hunting divinity to develop her most lethal arrow. Through hunt divinity, Artemis found the fatal parts in Chang'e's body, and with archery divinity, she aimed her arrow at the most vulnerable spot on Chang'e. And the silver arrow sailed towards Chang'e, who tried to defend himself. But it was pointless because the silver arrow was unstoppable and unavoidable. Artemis' move was a causality attack. Chang'e was defeated by a single devastating blow from the goddess of hunt. His little sister is fabulous, isn't she? She had ascended to the position of supreme moon goddess. Her authority over the moon had risen to the level of other supreme moon gods. Hermes threw a big party in honor of Artemis. In the divine realms, his little sister's reputation and fame skyrocketed, surpassing him, Hela, and Hephaestus. Meanwhile, Apollo also got into a little trouble with Chang'e's husband, Hoi, but nothing he couldn't handle. The Gobi Desert totally wasn't his fault. Artemis wasn't the only one growing in power on Mount Olympus. A few years ago, Athena also accomplished something monumental. The rumors told different stories about what happened. However, he was aware of the accurate specifics of what occurred. Being god of the sun and light has many perks. Under his light, not much can be hidden. During the day, he is almost omniscient and omnipresent in the Western world, and his sister is the same at night with the moon. It went like this. One day, Athena looked down on the world and saw nothing but destruction and chaos between the kingdoms and city-states of the Western world. It was just Ares being Ares. The god of war enraged men's hearts with blood and madness. He had amplified the emerging disparities and divisions in the Western world, pitting everyone against each other for a bloody battle. And then there was war. Here was the real problem that ticked Athena off. The goddess of wisdom had no qualms about war as she knew it was essential for the development of civilization. But she had strong feelings about the god who oversaw it, Ares. Oh, Athena despised him from the moment they met. Apollo was certain of it. After all, Ares represented everything Athena loathed and disdained. The god of war started wars for no reason or purpose other than to cause senseless destruction for his own amusement. He desired nothing more than chaos and destruction on the planet. He'll probably laugh like a third-rate supervillain as he watches the world burn. Yeah, Athena despised the guy. Apollo himself was not opposed to war. The cities and kingdoms blessed by him weren't that badly infected by the power of Ares, and nobody dared to provoke them. But if his followers wished to fight in the wars, he let them join Ares' madness. Athena, on the other hand, took a different approach than him, most probably because she cared more about humans than he ever did. She declared, enough, and willed her wisdom into the concept of war. Within a fortnight, she reinvented it, a completely new and improved version of war from the brand of Athena. It granted numerous benefits and advantages over the version of Ares, promising victory with little to no destruction and chaos. Athena invented strategic warfare and generously, forcefully, instilled it in human minds with her mark of divinity. And humans loved it, as they always do, tossing out the old version in pursuit of something new, shiny, and better. As one might expect, Athena gained divinity from this. Apollo wasn't sure if she wasn't expecting this outcome or if it was her plan from the start. But he was leaning toward the latter. All in all, Athena had ascended to become the goddess of strategy and warfare, stealing a part of the divinity of war from Ares. The god of war could only watch as his divinity was stripped from him. It was despairing to witness. He fought with all his will and power, but it was useless in the face of the might of the cosmos. His divine essence was stripped from him and purified of his will, then it transferred into Athena. It was a known fact that gods could steal the divinity of other divine beings through a few ways, but this new method Ares was stripped of his divinity scared many gods to their deaths. Ares went mad, literally mad. He thrashed Olympus and almost brought it down on earth while cursing Athena in every language on the planet. And they struck first with their swords and spears. The force of their exchange hurled them both into the atmosphere, heading for Mars. They fought and raged in space, illuminating the entire solar system with fiery explosions of raw power, then collided with Mars, nearly destroying it. Zeus broke up their fight, much to the chagrin of Apollo and Hermes. He was expecting an epic battle. He even wagered on Athena against Hermes, who bet on Ares entirely just out of spite. But alas, their father finally decided to ruin their fun, just like always. Zeus intervened in their fight with a display of might, bringing Athena and Ares to their knees. Though Apollo was fairly certain that Zeus's look at Athena was unusual compared to Ares. Athena must have probably risen on Zeus's not-so-secret-to-kill list. Under Zeus' pressure, Athena and Ares were forced to reconcile. However, this only amounted to increasing their hatred and abhorrence for one another, and they began to confront and thrash each other indirectly through mortals and demigods. They would go out of their way to destroy anything that was of interest to one another and spread the most vile rumors about one another throughout the world. Cadmus, the prince of Tyre, will bear the brunt of their wrath first, literally being ripped to shreds in between their clashes. The rivalries of Athena didn't end here as one might have thought. The goddess of wisdom was just getting started. Ares was only her first. Apollo would not be surprised if one day Athena appeared before Tyre's gates, clad in her distinctive armor, and challenged him for his sun chariot, declaring that she could drive the sun better than he ever could. Jokes aside, not long after her fight with Ares, the goddess of wisdom decided to challenge Poseidon to a contest over ownership of a rising city, Athens, which he had first claimed, right next to Trier. Athena won the competition since the mortals preferred her gift to the city over Poseidon's. Let's just say the god of the seas didn't take his loss to the younger generation well. On the same day, a massive storm encompassed the majority of the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Thus was born another rivalry that would go on to cause its own set of tragedies among mortals and demigods. Speaking of tragedies, Hera, the nastiest bitch of the cosmos, suffered a humiliating tragedy at the hands of her own son, Hephaestus. The gods had gathered on Mount Olympus for the 10th time to discuss the situation of the War of the Nine Realms, which was truly heating up at that moment. A live broadcast from the battlefield was sponsored by none other than Apollo, with commentary provided by Aphrodite. The gods sat at the edges of their thrones, not wanting to miss a detail of the battle as the light unfolded in the throne room of the gods. They had the ambrosia and nectar ready in their hands for the thrilling show of blood and war. On the last episode of the War of Nine Realms, Aphrodite began. Hela, the crown princess of Asgard, personally led the righteous army of gods through the wretched realm of Jotunheim, liberating the giants from the clutches of the evil tyrant Laufey. The princess was oblivious to the truth about her war, though. This was the final test for her from the All-Father. Would she die as another one of his disappointments or triumph as his worthy heir? Hephaestus barged into the throne room, disrupting the show much to the dismay and exasperation of all. He was welcomed into the throne rooms, however, because he brought gifts for everyone. Hera, on the other hand, obviously did not join in the fun. The god of fire didn't mind his mother. He took out his gifts and presented them to the gods. Finally, Hephaestus presented his last and greatest gift to his beloved mother. It was the most beautiful divine throne. The throne was perfect and ethereal in every sense, so much so that it managed to entice Hera herself, who sat on it without a second thought. She was instantly tightly bound by invisible and unbreakable chains. The chains encircled Hera so tightly that she couldn't breathe, and all of the divine ichor in her veins flowed from her arms and legs. Ares tried to persuade Hephaestus to release his mother, but the latter was obstinate and unyielding. The god of forges stormed out of the Council of Gods quickly, and no one bothered to stop him, not even Hera's own mighty husband, Zeus, who could have also completely broken the chains himself, but the Sky Father didn't do that and instead assigned the task to Hermes. Hermes began to visit Hephaestus from time to time and began to peacefully talk with him. A week later, Hermes finally convinced him to release Hera. That imp invented the silver tongue. Hephaestus came back to Mount Olympus, declared his forgiveness of Hera's act of cruelty, and released her. Here is where everything completely derailed from the intended course. The moment that Hera was unrestrained by Hephaestus, she attacked him in utter rage and indignation. Hera did not recognize Hephaestus as her son but instead disowned him fully in front of the council, labeling him an abomination unfit to be regarded as a god. It was Zeus who finally managed to calm his seething wife, who had destroyed most of Olympus in wrath. Despite Hera's rage, the Sky Father stuck to his word and gave Hephaestus a seat on the council. Apollo knew what had caused the change. It was him. He had already humiliated Hera before, and now Hephaestus did it again. It crushed her majesty and reputation for all to see, and no one, not even her own husband, offered her help and support in her most vulnerable state. That would be enough to snap anyone, let alone Hera. Knock. Apollo said, restraining his flying thoughts. Enter. Knock. Hermes, enter. Apollo rolled his eyes, his gaze penetrating the door. Knock. If you knock the door again. Apollo trailed off, letting the air carry his words. The door swung open immediately. Hermes entered the room with caution. I have come all this way, passed through treacherous paths, and fought terrifying monsters. I have warred against mighty gods, bearing the message just for you, my dear brother, free of cost. Chapter 62, Hopeless Love. If you knock again. Apollo trailed off, allowing the air to carry his words. The door swung open immediately. Hermes stepped into the solar, his hands in the air. I have traveled all this distance, fought many terrifying monsters, and waged war against mighty gods just to deliver the message to you, my dear brother, free of charge. Hermes wore a white tunic cinched to his waist and a wool robe across his shoulder, as well as a wide helmet and a pair of shoes with small wings sprouting from the sides, Hephaestus' gift. It's not like I'm going to pay you, Apollo said bluntly. Anyway. Oh. Hermes dramatically placed his hands over his heart. Sit down, Apollo pointedly ignored his antics, pointing to the chair in front of his table. And give me my message. Hermes seemed to be even more distraught, but he still heeded his words. He sat in the chair opposite him and handed him the scroll with a rose symbol, a message from Aphrodite. What is that? He asked, his other hand pointing to the pizza on the plate on the table. Pizza, I made it, Apollo said as he accepted the scroll. It's a dish from the future, would you like one? Cooking. He was serious about getting into cooking. And he quickly grasped the gist of it, becoming a master chef capable of giving all future chefs a run for their money. Being a god certainly has its advantages. There is no need for tedious practice, handwork, or rehash. All you need is complete knowledge of the topic/profession/skill, and you will become an unrivaled master of it immediately. Apollo chose pizza as his first dish to reinvent with his divine cooking skills since he missed pizza. After finishing his first divine pizzas, he served them to Hecate on their moonlight date. Hecate obviously fell head over heels for the pizza and, especially, its chef yet again, and then she. Let's just say that night was very long, metaphorically and literally, and it was totally worth it. Yes, Hermes responded, his gaze fixed on the pizza. He gulped as its enticing armor of exploding flavors blasted his face. Apollo smiled as he snapped his fingers. In the light, a plate of pizza appeared and floated towards Hermes. He quickly grabbed them and bit into one of them with incredible speed. As he began wolfing them down, his expression changed to one of delight. How is it? Apollo inquired as he read the scroll's contents, a message from Aphrodite. It's not bad, brother, Hermes said in between bits, but his relishing tone and puffy mouth betrayed him completely. Apollo just snorted. Eat slowly, imp. Hermes hummed indignantly. But he was too fixated on his pizzas to care about reproach. What does Aphrodite want? After a few moments of silence, he finally asked. Well. Apollo scribbled some of his new romance story ideas on the scroll. The same old. Aphrodite is looking for input on her new stories. Aphrodite is obsessed with stories, particularly tragedies and romances, to the point where she began writing them herself. So she came to try her frequently with her ridiculous and pompous son, Eros, hated that guy, to ask for advice from him and the 9 muses to get inspiration for her stories, and in exchange, she promised to give them credit in her stories. Aphrodite then began to direct her stories in the mortal world. She uses humans as her actors, toys, assisting, manipulating them to fall in love their destined ones. And she would let them take their fated path since Aphrodite believes that love should not be completely restrained. She will still check in on them from time to time to see if everything is perfect according to her standards, and if it isn't, she will break the love in the most dramatic and tragic way possible. With the help of the 9 muses and him, she published her favorite stories of the mortals throughout the divine realms of all pantheons and in all languages of the earth. And it was an immediate hit with the gods. If there were a billboard chart for stories, Aphrodite's tragic and dramatic tales would most likely have broken it. Her fame and reputation skyrocketed, as did the sales of her stories, and she gained even more fans among the gods. Hermes hummed as he returned to his pizza treat, clearly uninterested in the next heartbreaking love story that Aphrodite was probably cooking up. Though Apollo was certain, he saw a glint of sadness in Hermes' eyes when he mentioned Aphrodite. Intriguing. Hermes wolfed down the rest of the pizza and extended the empty plate to Apollo, asking, "Can I get some more?" "Well," Apollo said, tilting his head. "Who was the one?" "Please," Hermes admitted defeat to his brother, "your cooking is so delicious that I'm sure it's unrivaled in the realms of the gods, and I believe it won't be long before you ascend to the position of god of cooking." "Enough, Hermes," Apollo said with a smirk and a snap of his fingers. A golden plate with pizzas appeared and dashed towards Hermes. "The pizzas will never run out as long as you want." "Thank you," Hermes said, his eyes welling up with tears. "You are the greatest brother in the multiverse." Apollo merely gave him a look. "Just eat." Hermes immediately obeyed, devouring the delectable pizzas and savoring every bite. So, Apollo leaned back in his chair, making himself more comfortable. Olympus. "Nothing new," Hermes said as he pointed a slice of pizza at Apollo. "Though the divine quest issued by you to slay that ice lizard caused some commotion, it piqued the interest of many, including Athena, Ares, and Hera." He cast him a sidelong glance. "You mean primarily Hera," Apollo corrected nonchalantly. "Aren't you even slightly concerned that she'll steal the quest from you?" Hermes inquired in between bits. "No," Apollo stated flatly. "The one who will slay the dragon will only be my knight." Hermes stared at the last piece of pizza, his eyes gleaming with complicated light. He then sighed. "How are you always so confident in the face of everything, brother?" Apollo looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, "Believing in myself." He wasn't being cheesy about it. It was literally the truth. "Believing in myself." Hermes said again, his eyes snapping at his brother. "Yes," Apollo said emphatically. "I believe in myself." Hermes couldn't believe it. "It can't be that simple." "Hermes." Apollo smiled, sometimes the most difficult questions have the most simple answers. "So, do yourself a favor and believe in yourself, huh?" he said, pointing to his heart. His impish little brother, Hermes, had a rocky start on Olympus. It didn't help that he, Artemis, Athena, Ares, and Hephaestus were his brothers and sisters. They completely overshadowed Hermes in almost every way. Hermes averted his gaze from Apollo, nodding curtly. Then he inquired, abruptly changing the subject. Where is Hecate, brother? Apollo squinted at Hermes, but ultimately decided not to press any further. He really wasn't good with this emotional stuff. Hecate is practicing her new destructive spells in the testing room beneath Delphi. So that's why the entire continent was rumbling every now and then, huh? Hermes muttered under his breath. He then proceeded with the pizzas. Apollo returned his attention to the scroll of Aphrodite, continuing to write his suggestions for the goddess of love, making space for Hermes, who appeared to be in desperate need of it. Hermes rose from his seat and walked towards the Earth's projection, observing it. In the comfortable silence that hung in the air, his restless heart calmed down. Apollo placed the Aphrodite scroll on the table and took his religion file after adding his advices and thoughts to the scroll for the next story of the goddess of love. With his contributions, another hit is confirmed. He concentrated on his file, which contained constantly changing information. It displayed information about his religion, particularly about the first quest he had personally issued, slaying the divine dragon, Pagos. His religion was the most prevalent in the Western world. Despite divine punishment from him, the religion of the sun remained unaffected. After all, human civilization was entirely dependent on him in one way or another. Everything that made them who they were belonged to him: their fire, their language, their order, their hope, their knowledge, their art, and their music. His mark of divinity blazed through most aspects and concepts that made up Western civilization, so much so, he predicted he would gain divinity of civilization when his humans developed further, breaking the borders set by the pantheons with the rest of the world. He had laid the groundwork for human civilization. And his hold on humanity was unbreakable and unassailable. He gave them everything, and with a single thought, he can take it all back, obliterating Western civilization. Faith. Apollo himself never considered the power of faith as it was a two-edged sword. Gods could easily increase their power with the faith of mortals, but as the saying goes, all power has a cost. The gods would be affected by the mortals, their perceptions, thoughts, expectations, and stories. Mortals would have the same amount of power over the gods as they did over them. There is an excellent example of this situation. It's from a book series he read in his previous life, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. In that story, there is another Olympian pantheon and another Apollo. Apollo frowned, a pang of sourness filled his heart. He promptly pushed that pang into the recess of his heart and continued on, ignoring his last thought. Anyway, in that story, the Olympian gods have survived until the modern era because they are tied to Western civilization. They literally live off the memories and myths that humans have perceived about them. Even their personalities were affected by the mortals. If one considered it carefully, it was a truly terrifying prospect. They literally have no freedom at all. Overall, faith is poison for the gods. Not only he, but the majority of the gods agreed, and they never attempted to wield the power of faith, regardless of their earthly religions. The revelation that mortals would have power over them was all it took for the gods to absolutely despise the concept of faith. "Brother," Hermes said as he set the empty golden plate on the table. Apollo hummed, his gaze still fixed on the file. Hermes asked, fiddling with his fingers. "While we're on the subject, I'd like to seek advice." Apollo set the file down and turned to face him. "On what subject?" "Love," Hermes said, his gaze unconsciously drawn to the scroll of Aphrodite. "I want advice on love." Apollo followed his gaze. "So you fell in love with love, huh?" Hermes blinked. "I am that easy to see through," he said, waving his hands. "But first and foremost, why aren't you surprised by this?" "Should I be?" Apollo chuckled. "Aphrodite is the goddess of love and beauty. It would be strange if you didn't feel any desire towards her." "Not desire," Hermes corrected, "love." Yes, Apollo said coolly. "Love. So tell me everything, I'm all ears." Hermes took a deep breath, and then he said, "I love Aphrodite, brother. I didn't when I first started having feelings for her. Perhaps I always did from the moment I first laid eyes on her. She was just too gorgeous and ephemeral, so much so that—" "Stop," Apollo urged. "Everyone already knows how lovely and unearthly Aphrodite is, so skip the details and get to the point, Hermes." Hermes nodded, hesitantly, disappointed that he couldn't describe his love. "My feelings for her grew stronger by the day, until I couldn't control them any longer, so I decided this was it, and I'd never felt so certain in my life. I stopped Aphrodite in her path on the night of the full moon and proposed to her, pouring out my heart to her." Then he came to a halt. His words struck in the throat. "Let me guess," Apollo said quietly, "you were rejected." He shouldn't laugh. He really should not laugh, especially in this situation. "Ha ha 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 ha." Apollo laughed. "Hermes, you were actually rejected by Aphrodite." His mocking laughter pricked Hermes' heart, and the god of deceit clasped his hands, uttering belligerently, "Brother, is this how you treat me when I share something so personal with you?" I thought. He whimpered. "I'm sorry," Apollo said, his laughter fading and his feelings utterly bad. "I'm sorry, Hermes. That, you see, was shocking. I needed some time to process it. Yes, it may be too shocking for you, Hermes scowled. After all, who are you? The eternal blazing sun. The honored one who is praised and loved by all. Who are you to know what it feels like to be utterly and hopelessly rejected by the one you love the most? No, Apollo said, shaking his head, it's not like that. Never mind, he said after a brief pause. You wouldn't get it now anyway. Apollo. Hermes seethed, storming out of his room. It was my mistake to tell you this. Stop, Apollo said as he appeared in front of Hermes, his hands on his shoulders halting him. I was being an emotionless jerk. Certainly, Hermes said, glaring at him. You are truly the emotionless jerk, oh honored one, nobody could beat you at that. Apollo called up a golden plate with pizzas that were literally dazzling with flavor and said, I'm sorry, in the most sincere voice he could muster. Hermes stared at the pizza for a long time before taking a bite and snorting, I'll forgive you, just this once, brother. Come on, Apollo said, placing his hands over Hermes' shoulders and dragging him back to his solar. I will give you advice, Apollo said, easing Hermes' scowl. Hermes took his seat in front of Apollo, who sat back behind the silver table. The god of thieves was already back to enjoying and savoring the scrumptious pizza. Aphrodite, Apollo began, making sure Hermes was calm. Hermes set the pizza down and wiped his hands with a swift wave of the wind. Then he turned solemnly to face his brother, raptly listening. You see, Hermes, Aphrodite is not like most women, she is the goddess of love and beauty who believes in herself absolutely, so she can be extremely dominant, if you know what I mean. Dominant? Hermes asked, blinking. Oh, this is going to be very difficult. How many relationships has Aphrodite been in, Hermes? Apollo asked. Brother, grumbled Hermes. Tell me, Apollo demanded. A lot. Hermes said, a sour expression on his face. Honestly, I don't know. He looked downcast at the ground. Well, Apollo continued soothingly, who took the first initiative in all of this? Hermes remained silent for a moment before turning his stare toward Apollo. Aphrodite. Apollo crossed his arms and looked at Hermes, expecting Hermes to deduce the truth for himself. Brother. Hermes inquired, somewhat hesitantly. You mean, Aphrodite is dominant in everything? Yes. Apollo emphasized. Everything. In a matter of microseconds, Hermes' expression changed from incomprehension to disbelief, sadness to grief, and finally to melancholy. Apollo could only speculate on what was going on in his mischievous and brilliant mind, but he continued anyway, not wanting him to completely fall into the trouble known as Aphrodite. That's why, Hermes, Aphrodite rejected your advance. In my opinion, you can do better than Aphrodite, find someone willing to give their entire heart rather than just a piece of it for their own amusement. Hermes hung his head, his emotions obscured behind his own shadow. Apollo, being the considerate brother that he is, immediately poured a glass of ambrosia for Hermes and handed it to him. Hermes took the glass, drank it all, and returned it to him for more. Apollo then poured more for him. This happened again and again, making Apollo frown. He got up from his seat. Come with me, Hermes, we're going to do that challenge we've always put off. Finally. Hermes asked, his eyes bright with excitement. However, it was quickly extinguished. No, you'll let me win just to make me feel better, I don't need your pity, brother. No, idiot, Apollo chuckled as he lightly punched him on the shoulders. It will be a fair contest. Hermes sulked on the ground, his gaze fixed on the ground. Apollo sighed and then yelled. Athena. There was a brief moment of silence until a blaze of light erupted in front of them, morphing into a divine projection of the goddess of wisdom. Athena fixed her gaze on Apollo, her face as expressionless as ever. You know, Apollo, I was preparing for something very important when you called. It is actually related to that, Apollo said. We want to have our match in the mortal games you are conducting, and we also want you to personally preside over it. For a brief moment, Athena squinted at him, and Apollo could clearly see her stormy gray eyes turning calculative, inferring all the advantages and disadvantages of this course of action. She then curtly nodded. Well, it's tomorrow, and everything is set in stone. But I could make an exception for you. Hermes. Apollo elbowed Hermes. Hermes nodded silently, getting to his feet. What happened to him? Athena finally looked at Hermes, who was depressed. Apollo mouthed. Aphrodite. Oh. Athena nodded clearly, as if she could already guess everything. What are the games called? Hermes finally asked, his gloom fading. Olympic Games, they said in unison. Chapter 63, Athena. Athens, Greece. The evening light flitted through the streets of a rising city, illuminating it in red and orange vibrant colors. It was teeming with mortal and extraordinary beings scrambling towards a structure, a colossal stadium, perched along a rising mountain, gleaming in the last twilight of the sun. It was finally time for the historic event that rattled the Western world, to be hosted by the institutions and temples of wisdom. Olympics. It was to be held in Athens, a prosperous and vibrant city-state with winding paths and roads winding through small residences and colossal palaces. In the cusp of it all stood a world wonder, a gargantuan divine statue of Athena herself, her figure valiantly wielding a shield and a spear that seemed to pierce the sky itself. It was nearly 300 meters tall and bathed in a divine and sacrilegious aura. A divine halo adorned her head, and the goddess in the statue raised her head, as if looking out over the entire world beneath her feet. It was the Athena Parthenos, a world wonder built in honor of the goddess of wisdom after the temple of Athena's headquarters relocated to Athens a decade earlier after the goddess claimed the city as her own. The religion of Athena was almost as prevalent as the religion of the Lord of the Sky and was only suppressed by the religion of the sun. The goddess of wisdom did not seek to be worshipped by mortals at first, all she cared about was their knowledge and development, so she founded Athenian institutions of knowledge and research with the goal of advancing human civilization. Her institutions had spread throughout the Western world's major city-states and kingdoms, imparting knowledge with her mark of divinity to humanity in a structured manner. Humans began to build temples in her honor and worship her in piety as her knowledge spread throughout Western civilization. Athena did not stop them since she knew it was inevitable, rather, she acknowledged the religion of wisdom and took complete control of it. She personally descended on the mortal world and guided her developing religion to completion and perfection, drawing heavily on the religion of the sun for inspiration. Athena had instructed her believers before returning to her abode in the sky, letting her words burn into their minds, hearts, and souls. Knowledge is supreme, especially in its purest form, idea. Though weightless, a simple idea can create world wonders, raise empires, and even tear civilizations. Knowledge is power, and using it as a lever, we could move the entire cosmos. Nevertheless, it must be used prudently, as with any other power. Each step on the path of wisdom should be undertaken with caution and willingness. With her words, her religion became ingrained in almost every aspect of Western civilization. Her power over human civilization grew exponentially as humans sought her knowledge for everything in their daily lives. It only amounted to an increase once she ascended to the position of goddess of strategy and warfare. Her temple and institutions branched out to introduce the division of war and strategy to help and teach mortals on the subject. Regardless of their religions or beliefs, humans collectively respected and honored the goddess of wisdom. With the ramifications of the corruption of war brought by Ares still felt in civilization, Athena announced the Olympic Games with a clear goal. It was an opportunity for her and her humans. The Olympics were about to be held in Athens, with mortals and immortals alike concentrating their attention on the city of Athena. The entire world seemed to be brimming with excitement and zeal for the Olympics, which were originally intended to be only for mortals and demigods. However, an unexpected announcement from the Temple of Wisdom changed just about everything. Athena had abruptly added a new match to the Olympics, pushing it above all other events scheduled for the historic night. It was a race between the god of deceit and the eternal blazing Sunday. And immediately, mortals flocked to the stadium to witness the divine race for themselves. It wasn't every day that one could witness a match between gods, much less one with the eternal blazing sun himself. The eternal blazing sun has always remained a mystery to mortals. In his actions, the sun god appeared impartial, but he was also generous, he appeared cruel, but also kind, he appeared indifferent, but also benign. In the end, who was the eternal blazing sun? Nobody knew the answer. His divine marks and steps were ever present throughout human civilization, but his actual presence in the mortal world was non-existent. The eternal blazing sun, unlike the other gods and goddesses who walked the earth interacting with humans, never did. He had always kept his distance from his creations. So his participation in the Olympics was so unprecedented that the believers, who were fervent believers in the sun all over the world, collapsed in tears of pain and reluctance the moment the news reached their ears. They would never be able to travel to Athens in time to witness the glory of their Lord and Savior in person. They prayed and cried to Athena till their words reached her ears, and the goddess made one last change to her plans. The sun steadily set into the horizon. The final rays of light faded into darkness, heralding the advent of night, brimming with millions of stars. The Olympics is nigh. Athena made her way through a long corridor in the Olympic Stadium, towards the premium boxes for the guests. It's nearly time. With the commencement of the Olympic Games, her hold on Western civilization will become all but cemented. She will gain the divinity of civilization that she so desires in the future as her humans develop beyond their borders. She came to a halt in front of the door to the box with the insignia of the sun and torch and knocked on it. She had gone over all of the event preparations, and only the last one remained. "Come in," said a tranquil voice. It was Hecate, definitely not Apollo, as his voice always hung on the edge of languidness. Athena stepped into the box. Hecate greeted her on the balcony of the box and she was alone. "Join me, Athena," gestured Hecate, turning to face her. The goddess of magic wore a void black gown with space nebula hues, as if stars were being born in her bodice. Her hair exerted a blackness that revealed the eternal darkness. Her irises were pitch black, overflowing with pure and raw magic. She was the polar opposite of Apollo, who was all about being sunny and flashy. And no matter how many times Athena hears about their relationship, it still brings a pang of surprise to her heart. It wasn't the only thing she noticed about Hecate. She felt a difference in her aura since the last time she met Hecate. She had arrived in Athens to spread her magic in her city. Her aura was no longer divine, but almost primal in essence. Athena walked toward the balcony of the box. She didn't pry further into this new development with her wisdom. She knew she would most certainly fail, and even Hecate might notice her action. After all, she was the mysteries. But that didn't stop her from making educated guesses. The gears in her head turned and clicked, and she came to the most logical and likely conclusion: it was related to the web of magic that Hecate had woven into reality. It was an unprecedented creation that spanned the Western world, imbuing the world with magic. Athena, on the other hand, found herself stumbling at that conclusion. She couldn't pry anything out of the web of magic since everything related to it was concealed by the primordial goddess of night herself. It was also what kept Zeus at bay. Hecate had the support of Apollo and Nyx. Her wretched father, despite his great displeasure with the existence of the web of magic, couldn't do much about it. The goddess of wisdom mentally sighed in frustration, pushing Hecate's mystery to the back of her mind and focusing on the present. She stood on the balcony with Hecate, gazing down at the vast and majestic stadium she had built with her power. "Would you like one?" offered Hecate, a glass of nectar out of courtesy. "No," said Athena, shaking her head. She didn't want to get drunk, especially since the Olympics were only a few minutes away. She was, after all, personally hosting it for mortals and immortals to witness. Then she brought forward the reason for her last-minute intrusion. "The broadcast." "It is in order," said Hecate. "The Olympics will be broadcasted throughout the Western world." Athena found herself saying, "Thank you." "Don't be," smiled Hecate. "It's the very least I could do with Apollo taking part in your games." She said Apollo's name with such tenderness and affection, as if she wouldn't hesitate to go to heaven and hell, places forbidden even to the gods, for him. In Q, Aphrodite's words came to her mind: "Their love is purer than anything I have ever seen." Athena nodded to Hecate and looked down at the stadium, her eyes flashing with a strange light that matched her emotions. She pointedly ignored it, and asked about something else important. "Has Artemis returned?" Hecate's smile faded. "No," she said curtly, without further explanation. Athena didn't press. She already had the answer she desired, but from Hecate's tone, it seemed Apollo was still very upset with Artemis for taking on their father's dangerous quest. "How much time is still left?" inquired Hecate, also looking down at the stadium. "In fact, any time now," said Athena. "All that is needed is a sign from Nike, and I will descend to begin the Olympics. Best of luck, Athena." Hecate extended her hand. "The mark of wisdom shall shine brighter than ever on civilization." Athena shook her hand, unsurprised by her words. A pure stream of information emerged in the room, as if on cue. She grabbed and analyzed the information. Then she told Hecate. "It's time, Hecate." The Lady of Mysteries nodded, watching the goddess of wisdom disappear in a flash of light. Then she raised her hand, and wisps of magic emerged between her fingers. They gathered and transmuted into a rune that glidingly graced her palm. An arcane rune expressing transmission. Magic hummed from the rune. Hecate glanced at it and crushed it without hesitation, unleashing an unseen and unheard wave of pure magic surging forward in all directions. Immediately, numerous floating curtains unfolded with the magic wave in every major point and place of human civilization, as well as the abodes and realms of the gods, throughout the Western world. The magical curtains shimmered and glitched together, revealing a live image of the Olympic Stadium for the Western world. Mortals thronged the stadium, filling every nook and cranny like a sea. And they all fell silent, turning toward the arena in the middle of the stadium as though they had all heard a call. From the edges of the stadium, light beams descended into the center of the arena, forming stacked illusory owl feathers. A divine figure in a strenuous posture emerged from the enveloping feathers. The figure then walked out, revealing herself to the world. She was dressed in a long, white, sleeveless gown with golden lines that resembled sunlight veins. Her head was adorned with an imperial golden helmet, and she held a spear in her hand. Image here. She was none other than Pallas Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. Athena was beautiful, regally mesmerizing. She emitted a contradictory aura. At times she felt tyrannical, as if she demanded absolute obedience. At times she felt strenuous, as if she was judging their entire human civilization for its worth, and at other times she felt gentle, as if she were here to bestow some of her infinite wisdom on them. The wisdom goddess cleared her throat and began. She willed her voice to resound like thunder rolling through the sky. "Greetings everyone. I'm Athena, the Lady of Wisdom, and I'll be your host again tonight." Athena addressed the gods and goddesses, and then her ever-stern gaze turned towards her humans. "I created you with the eternal blazing sun, the Lady of Silver, the Titan of Forethought, and the Lady of Love, but time taints even the purest of creations. Division causes differences, differences cause estrangement, estrangement causes suspicion, suspicions cause caution, caution causes hostility. And hostility. She paused, allowing it to sink in. Hostility begets war, death, chaos, and destruction, the dark aspects of civilization. They may, in fact, be necessary for the advancement of civilization. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to confront them, never, ever bow in the face of the wretched fates, instead, raise your weapons bravely and stand in unity against them. The Lady of Wisdom raised her spear. Here, once every 4 years, under my witness, the world's city-states and kingdoms shall put aside their differences and divisions, and join together in my games for victory and honor. She slammed her spear onto the ground, and the mortals felt the world itself rumble. The arena began to come to life. Cracks in the floor sprayed sand all over the arena. It swirled and morphed into massive columns, long tracks, large sectors, massive nets, tiny lakes, and even small mountains. Everything came into existence in a matter of seconds. Athena boomed, "Welcome to the Olympics." The amphitheater and the rest of the world were filled with roars and cheers. Light streaks erupted into the sky from the stadium's arches, exploding into millions of vibrant, bright specks that loaded the dark heavens. The crowds fell silent as the wisdom goddess raised her hand. She then declared, "The Olympic Games begin with a divine race from Athens in Europe to red Mars in infinity of space." Athena continued, her voice as loud as thunder. "He is the god of deceit and trickery, the brilliant hand tinkering space and time. He is the lord of the path and travel, the messenger of the gods themselves. Great Hermes." A blinding light streaked into the arena, unveiling Hermes, the god of deceit and trickery himself. He had curly black hair, blue eyes, elfish features, and a sly grin. Messenger. He wore a brown tunic cinched to his waist and a wool robe across his shoulder, as well as a wide helmet and a pair of shoes, both with small wings sprouting from the sides. Image here. The god of deceit waved his hands, and raucous cheers exploded. An array of kaleidoscopic flows bloomed into existence and bathed him. The cheers died down with a wave from Lady Wisdom, and she once again declared, "Everyone knows of this god. His bow and spear spark fear even in the hearts of the bravest. He is the light, inextinguishable and imperishable. He is order, impartial and equitable. He is the sun, cruel and kind. The Olympians' mightiest. The eternal blazing sun himself. Phoebus Apollo." A colossal beam of dawn erupted from the arena's floor like the world's largest sword. The brilliant sword slashed into the dark sky, tearing the night apart. Light poured out like a waterfall, casting various shades of light across the rippling night sky. A divine figure descended from the brightened sky, emitting an infinite amount of pure light as if the sun itself were descending on the world. It did not harm their eyes, but was warm, gentle, and welcoming to all. Tears of joy and piety welled up in the eyes of sun worshippers around the world as they witnessed the divine descent of their Lord. It was a moment of honor that burned in their memories forevermore. The sun descended between the god of deceit and the Lady of Wisdom, slightly dimming and revealing the divine figure. He was a young man, about 19 or 20 years old. On his brow was a golden sun insignia. His tanned visage radiated the bright shine and warmth of the sun, and his long hair burned with flaming golden flames. A white tunic covered his lower chest and was attached to his back shoulders. A golden sash embraced the god's waist. He wore auric sandals and left scorch marks wherever his feet touched the ground. Image here. Eternal blazing sun. The stadium and the rest of the world erupted with roars and exclamations. Like a tsunami, the adoration grew louder and louder. They chanted again and again, their voices disoriented, till everything clicked into place, syncing and ringing in unison. The combined voices of mortals and immortals were raucous, exacerbating the earth to quiver. Chapter 64, Athena, 2. For a fleeting moment, Athena was afraid that Apollo was entering his divine form with his descent, which could literally unleash a supernova on the face of the earth. But, thank Gaia, it was just Apollo being Apollo, sunny and flashy. He had assumed a new image befitting his position as the god of the sun. Apollo should be a suitable candidate for the position of god of theatrics. It could even be said that he inherited the dramatic gene from their father. Athena glanced at the shattered sky. It was healing, with the night burying the light and then banishing dawn into darkness. Millions of stars from the Milky Way and beyond gradually returned to the sky, glistening with cosmic light. She also felt more in the sky. The eyes of the gods and goddesses were on her and her brothers. She recognized the gazes of their father, Poseidon, Hades, Hestia, Demeter, Helios, Selene, Aphrodite, and many other divine beings. Her event had captured the attention of the entire Western world. Such acclaim was unexpected, but the divine race of Apollo and Hermes completely elevated the impact and significance of her games on the civilization and its history. It's not that Athena didn't consider inviting the gods to participate in her games in order to increase the impact of them. But they were proud beings at heart. Most divine beings would have rejected it because it would be beneath them to participate in mortal and demigod games. Athena turned her stormy gaze to her stadium. Sun worshippers in the Western world were still chanting Apollo's divine title with such zeal that it seemed as if they wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice their lives if Apollo so desired. The awful truth is that they really might. The sun worshippers took their devotion to a whole new level. While Hermes crossed his hands and observed her stadium, Apollo waved his hands at his followers with a brilliant smile that elicited a new wave of raucous roars. Deciding it was enough, Athena raised her hand. She allowed her divinity to overflow from her and connect with her knowledge in all humans across the Western world. Then she directly transmitted her command to their brains. And humanity fell silent in submission to her will. Apollo and Hermes turned to her, but before she could even open her mouth, the Sunny interpreted her. Apollo said to Hermes, "Let us grant something to the games, Hermes. It is the best we can do after interfering with Athena's plans." Hermes merely nodded, his visage slowly returning to its ever vehemence. It at least showed he was recovering. Hermes had been an emotional wreck since the day before. He immediately left Delphi after finalizing the match. Apollo was still concerned about their brother and informed Hermes' mother, Maia, of the situation, lest he do something really idiotic again. Athena paused as the thoughts raced through her head. "Apollo, just by participating in my games, you are already." Still, Apollo insisted. "Let us." After a brief moment of thought, Athena nodded. There was no reason for her to refuse, and she was eager to see what they would grant. They teleported to the center of the arena, which was vacant since Athena planned to hold the award ceremony with Nike here. Apollo looked at Hermes and they nodded. They appeared to have finished a secret communication solely through their eyes. Apollo and Hermes were true siblings, while she didn't even try to put effort into maintaining that relationship with them. Looking at them now, Athena felt her heart empty, and questions began to crawl into the void in her heart. But she steeled herself immediately, purging those questions from her heart. It didn't matter. Revenge and vengeance come above all. She will not rest until the head of her father rests on the tip of her bloodied spear. "You must live, Athena," her mother had said. "Live for yourself and no one else." Her grip on her spear tightened ever so slightly. She didn't dare show her emotions on her face. Athena had to bear it all and live to see her father's ultimate fall. She suppressed her chaotic emotions and forced herself to refocus her gaze on her brothers. Hermes was pressing his hand on the ground. The sand rose up, swirling and curling on itself like a small yellow tornado. The divinity of deceit was being imbued into every fine particle of sand by Hermes. The very concepts of reality were twisted and distorted by the yellow tornado. Every particle shimmered with unseen power and coalesced together with the thrum of reality, unveiling a magnificent brazier. The brazier was conceptual in essence. With his divinity of deception, Hermes has tinkered with many concepts of reality, deceiving and tricking the rules of reality to follow his will and order in its creation. The brazier was near perpetual, frozen in time. It was also nearly invulnerable and nearly imperishable. Even after 1,000,000 years, if human civilization had long since fallen, the brazier would still be there as a remnant of its past glory. The combination of Hermes' brilliant mind and his power of deception can never fail to amaze Athena. Many looked down on Hermes, secretly or openly. But, unlike others, Athena did not dare dismiss her eccentric brother. Athena narrowed her eyes at them, as now Apollo and Hermes raised their hands together after crafting the brazier. Their palms faced each other, and their divinities erupted. Roar! A blaze of flames immediately roared into existence in between their hands, brightening everything for a fraction of a moment. Mortals closed their eyes, unable to bear the glare of the seething flames. Athena squinted her eyes, seeing past the brightness of the roaring flames. Apollo and Hermes turned the flames in her direction and looked into her eyes. Oh, Gia! She actually understood the message they wanted to convey by just exchanging glances with them. Without delving into her thoughts, Athena complied. She raised her hand and pointed to the dazzling flames. Her divinity infused into the flames. The flames turned brighter and brighter with her blessing, like a second sun on Earth. The rays of light from the sun impacted the stratosphere. Most of the northern hemisphere was illuminated. Apollo cupped the divine flames in his hand, and everything immediately dimmed. Mortals were finally able to open their eyes, and they witnessed the eternal blazing sun wielding a white flame in his risen hand. The sun god boomed. "This is the eternal flame. Every 4 years, at the start of the Olympic Games, the victor shall carry the flames throughout civilization and reignite the Olympic brazier in honor of Athena, and the Olympic Games shall begin." Apollo then placed the eternal flames on the brazier. The flames burned, bright and dazzling in eternity. The stadium immediately erupted with raucous cheers from mortals and immortals alike. And Athena looked at them with emotional eyes. They truly immortalized the Olympic Games in time and history by granting the flames. The eternal flames symbolized unity and eternity. It carried the divine marks of wisdom, the sun, and deceit in its white embers. Her games will continue to be played every 4 years, bringing and uniting the civilizations together for the rest of eternity. The main worry plaguing her heart settled down, and she is certain that this was a suggestion from Apollo. It was always like this, as if he always knew everything. Well, considering that he is also the god of prophecy and divination, maybe he really does. But, still, nothing can deny what Apollo was to her. Despite being the goddess of wisdom, she couldn't understand or comprehend him. She hates mysteries almost as much as she despises her abomination of a father. And Apollo was filled with nothing but mysteries for her. Restraining her thoughts, Athena raised her hand, and the mortals followed her will, falling silent. Then she said it sincerely. "Thank you. Don't mention it, Athena." Apollo shook his head. "It's the least we could do." Hermes added with a slight smile. "Come on," Athena said, nodding. "It's time for your race." They teleported to the tracks on the side of the arena without wasting time. Apollo and Hermes took their positions next to each other. Athena walked in front of them, and everyone held their breath together. "Brother," Hermes whispered. "Don't hold back." "Are you sure?" Apollo arched his brows. "I don't care who wins." Hermes whispered. "I just want to have a race, running among the stars without worry, prejudice, or anything." Apollo raised his fist. "Come on, then, to the stars." Hermes chuckled and bumped fists with him. "To the stars." Athena turned and declared, her eyes flashing with complex light. "The time is finally nigh for the divine race between the eternal blazing sun and the god of deceit. It is from the green of Earth to the red of Mars." Her brothers nodded, and the countdown began, flashing into form in front of them. Hermes' figure began to vibrate violently. Air danced through his figure, flapping the wings on his helm and boots, which began to flutter and cheer. Meanwhile, streaks of light coursed through the body of Apollo as his hands and legs also emitted brilliant beams of light. Time seemed to freeze. The world seemed to hold its breath. Silence seemed to reign supreme. Then, all hell derailed as the countdown ended. Apollo and Hermes shot forth into the dark sky as if they were two comets, Apollo being white and Hermes being bronze. In an instant, the night sky across the northern hemisphere was torn, unveiling a brilliant universe for a moment, twirling galaxies, burning stars, devouring black holes, swirling planets, and in the middle of it all, the sun in its true might. The night sky immediately closed the tier with concealment, blocking and erasing the truth of the cosmos from mortal minds. Boom. A terrifying rumbling seemed to shake the world. It jolted the mortals out of their astonishment, and they glanced down at the track. Athena held her hands together. She had restrained the terrifying force that erupted from the launch of the Apollo and Hermes within her palm. She cursed them in her mind for their reckless selves. They didn't even bother to negate the force brought about by their speed, trusting her to deal with it. If she had been a second late, the earth would have gone poof. "Erase," she whispered, simulating the power of order with her divinity of knowledge. And the surging and terrifying force in her hand vanished into nothingness. Athena then turned and looked at the night sky, ignoring the eyes of mortals. The live broadcast for mortals was cut by Hecate. It was not the time for humans to learn about space and other worlds. She focused on the race. It is from here to Mars and then back to Earth. It will take approximately 8 minutes. She isn't certain, as she didn't know the accurate speeds of her brothers. Hermes had been working hard on his speed, so much so that she wouldn't be surprised if he had managed to break through light speed, and Apollo had already achieved light speed long ago. He must have made some progress in the past few years. Athena, gaze pierced through the night sky and onto the darkness of space. She immediately witnessed the race with the other gods and goddesses. In the dark space between Earth and Mars, Apollo and Hermes dashed away like shooting stars. Their advent illuminated the ocean of space with brilliant light to the extent that it looked as though two brilliant suns had arisen between Earth and Mars. Hermes turned to look at his brother, who was purposefully slowing himself down and matching his pace with him. Then he nodded to his brother, as if to say, "Let's finally begin." Apollo nodded and snapped his fingers. Their running path glistened with light, and Hermes witnessed something that he would never forget for the rest of his life. Before them, billions of specks of light bloomed into existence, forming a cosmic running track in their path. It surged from Earth to Mars and back in a matter of seconds. Hermes looked at the light path under his feet. It was like a river of stars, surging and gleaming brilliantly. "To the stars," he whispered. Their figures began to accelerate on the cosmic track. Apollo dashed ahead of him at the speed of light, leaving him far behind in the darkness of space. Hermes closed his eyes and immersed himself in this ceaseless moment. Running was his way of escape, escape from the supposition, escape from the prejudice, escape from the worries, from the duties, from the world itself, to feel a moment of serenity, a moment of freedom, a moment of liberation. Crack! He took a steep step and shot forth in blinding light with a thunderous sound. He had finally broken through and achieved the speed of light after all of his attempts and efforts. A bright and zealous smile plastered across his lips, and he began to run towards his brother, closing the distance between them slowly. Apollo turned and looked at him with raised brows, as if he were surprised that he had managed to keep up with him. Then he smirked, his trademark arrogant, narcissistic smirk, which always made Hermes want to punch him in the face. Unfortunately, it also meant his brother was finally getting serious. As if to confirm his suspicions, Apollo galloped at an even faster speed, leaving him in the dust again. How fast is he really? Hermes thought, but he shook that thought out of his head. He really didn't care who won, it obviously will be his brother, he just wanted to run without care in this ceaseless moment of liberation. With that thought, he shot forth, squeezing out his divinity and will, and followed his brother towards the bright red planet, Mars. They ran and ran in cosmic track, reaching Mars within 2.5 minutes with Apollo at the front and Hermes at the tail, and they took a cosmic U-turn around the red planet, keeping their terrifying speed. The force from them shone brightly on the innocent planet. The entire red planet quivered and trembled thoroughly as though it might crumble on itself at any moment. However, the force and crumbling were quickly erased by Apollo. Boom. They continued their race, returning to Earth with a calm and zealous smile, blitzing everything in their path to oblivion. On Earth, mortals looked up at the night sky, filled with apprehension and anticipation. It's been nearly 6 minutes since the eternal blazing sun and god of deceit ascended into the night sky. The dark sky was suddenly lit up with white and bronze light, jolting the mortals to their feet. They were like shooting stars in the sky, descending from the dark heavens, leaving a trail of lights, and the world trembled under their descent. Mortals closed their teary eyes instinctively, unable to bear the glare of light yet Aegean. However, some still caught a glimpse of Lady Wisdom raising her hands as if to receive the shooting stars within her embrace. Athena prepared herself, ready to negate the force from their light-speed descent onto the planet. Finally, they did, their feet touched the ground, disintegrating everything to the molecular level. She immediately willed her divinity, simulating the power of order once again on the force. The world-ending force was erased from existence with a flash of wisdom. With that, Apollo and Hermes immediately streaked past her. She even managed to catch a glimpse of them smiling at her before dashing past the finish line. A tall and beautiful goddess descended near the finish line, wearing a glittering sleeveless dress, with her dark hair in piled-up braids circled with a gilded crown. Nike, the goddess of victory. Nike walked towards Apollo and raised her hand. With a burst of golden light, a gilded wreath woven with golden leaves from the laurel tree, the divine tree of Apollo, was revealed. She glanced at Athena for permission, and the Lady of Wisdom nodded. This is the crown of victory for the Olympics. Nike honored Apollo. Apollo bowed his head under the eyes of all, and Nike placed the crown of victory on his head. The victor of the race of the first Olympics is. She caught his hand and raised it. Phoebus Apollo. The goddess of victory declared. Chapter 65, The Waning Moon. Through the winding paths, Apollo and Hermes walked out of the stadium, greeted by a rising city of Athens, gray-tiled roofs, ivory temple domes, steepled towers, and sun-bathed buildings. In the middle of it all stood the gigantic statue of Athena, her ever-strenuous eyes seeming to gaze at them, as if to say, "Get out already, your match is complete." The sun slowly rose from the horizon. The first rays of dawn shone on Apollo, illuminating his changed form. His long golden hair had turned to short brown hair. The sun insignia in his glabella had faded, with his lean figure returning to his chiseled build. Hermes let out a weak laugh, gazing at the statue. Whoever designed her statue has done a really great job. They perfectly captured her essence. Their match is finished. They had decided to leave under Apollo's suggestion after witnessing some boring demigod games. The Olympics are still going on, though under the supervision of Athena. They sure did. Apollo smiled, his gaze riveted on the statue. Hermes' smile broadened, dragging him down into the streets of Athens. I bet Athena paid them generously for their perfect job. Apollo laughed, looking around the beautiful streets and pathways glistening in his light. Don't let her hear you, who knows how the perfectionist will react. Hermes said boastfully, on the spur of the moment. What can she do to me now anyway? Apollo gave him a look that clearly said, don't come begging to me at that time. This is nothing. I will deal with it. Hermes waved his hand nonchalantly, not backing down on his words. Now, where are we going, brother? To an immortal tavern. Apollo revealed with a frown of distress. Artemis will be joining us. She had returned from her quest and is reporting to father now. Not us, Hermes corrected, freezing in his steps. You. For a god of messengers, you are pretty withdrawn. Apollo said. Artemis won't mind, Hermes. How are you certain? Hermes fiddled with his fingers. I think Artemis doesn't like me. Of course she does. Apollo said, don't let her poker facade fool you. Artemis sees you same as me. He allowed a smile to appear on his frowning lips. You are our annoying little brother. She see me as, what? Hermes exclaimed. His divine brain almost short-circuited with that information. And you, brother. You see my point is. Apollo interrupted. It is fine. And don't always worry or overthink too much. It won't do you any good, Hermes. Hermes looked at the bright sky. Then he exhaled. Thank you, brother, thank you for always being there. Now. Apollo said, don't get emotional on me. Don't try to shrug it off. Hermes weakly smiled, his gloom fading. You are pretty good with this stuff, much better than you give yourself credit for. Or so they say. Apollo rolled his eyes. I am really not good at this. He paused for a moment, then continued in a light tone. Anyway, today is not about me. It is about you. So what have decided? About Aphrodite? Hermes sighed, placing his hands over his face. Well, I realize that you are right. It is impossible between me and Aphrodite. She could never fulfill my expectations for my love, one I wish to spend eternity with. But it was painful, you know, realizing the truth. There was still a part of me that hoped otherwise. He took a deep breath, his tone a mix of dark and light. But I have decided to move on and follow your advice. Everything is for the best. Apollo smiled. This calls for a celebration. It does. Hermes blinked. Yes. Apollo nodded briskly. I just decided on it. Oh. Hermes' lips rose to finally form a smile, and the heaviness in his eyes faded away. Brother. Come on. Apollo wrapped his hands around his shoulders, dragging him forward into the streets towards the Immortal Tavern. We don't want to keep our sister waiting, don't we? Our sister? Hermes' face darkened. Does Artemis really consider me like that? Apollo merely smiled. Why don't you ask her yourself? As if I am going to. Hermes muttered under his breath. What? Apollo asked with a raised eyebrow. Nothing, brother. Hermes said, immediately changing the subject. So is Hecate not joining us? No, Apollo said. She insisted on helping Athena with the broadcast of the remaining games. She wanted to properly finish what she started. Hermes dropped the topic, noticing the sourness of his brother. He asked, looking around the city. Where is the tavern? The other end of the city. Apollo pointed. It is run by the Temple of Demeter, especially for the service of immortals throughout the Western world. I heard about them. Hermes nodded. But I never got the time to visit. It is great. Apollo said. Ant has managed to monopolize the entire food and beverages sector of the Western world with it. All depend on her. She single-handedly manages it. I didn't know that. Hermes wagged his fingers, slowly regaining his ever-vehemence. Then, let's go, and I can't wait to finally visit it. They made their way through the winding streets and long bridges, passing through colossal towers and rising temples, witnessing the brilliance of human civilization. Athens was buzzing with activity, despite it being only 6:30 in the morning. Humans crowded around the magic curtains, watching the Olympic Games. There was even betting going on for the demigod matches. The sons of Zeus, Poseidon, and Helios are leading it by a larger margin. It is amazing, brother. Hermes sighed. What? Apollo raised his brows. Human civilization. Hermes wondered. They had achieved this much in a few decades with the help of us. What will it be like after 100, 1,000 years? I can give you a glimpse of the future. Apollo said. If you want to, that is. No. Hermes shook his head. That will take away everything meaningful. Your wish, Apollo hummed. Then. They walked a few more steps before Hermes stopped with hesitation, succumbing to his curiosity. Just tell me how it is. It is brilliant. Apollo chuckled and gave him a sidelong glance, as if he already knew he was going to ask that. The world will be connected more than ever, not just ours but the whole earth as one. Impossible. Hermes snapped his eyes at him. The gods and the pantheons won't ever allow that. Then, he immediately shook his head. No, don't tell me. I rather prefer to wait and witness everything personally. Whatever or however it may be in the end. Apollo hummed and pointed towards the secluded corner of the street. We are here. They strode towards it and entered a shimmering curtain that kept the mortals from knowing of its existence. The worn-down building in front of them immediately changed, unveiling a huge tavern with a gate woven with plants and flowers. At the top of it all, there was a huge sign that read, Welcome to Persephone Tavern. That is so like Ant. Hermes commented, gazing at the sign. Apollo smiled and then said, Let's wait here. This is the back entrance. No one will disturb us. Artemis should be here in a few minutes. He suddenly frowned, as if he had received a bad message. And she is carrying a bad news. Hermes finally managed to recall the quest that Artemis went on, feeling utterly bad. He was sulking in his own emotions that he subconsciously ignored the troubles of his brother. Apollo corrected himself, his eyes heavy. Very bad news. What do you see in fate? Hermes immediately asked, feeling the direness in his brother's tone. Apollo rubbed his temples and shook his head. But, you are, Hermes tried to explain the obvious. The god of prophecy. Yes, I indeed am the great god of prophecy and even divination. But still, what is the use? Apollo snapped. I don't see anything now. He looked at the sky. Fate is a fucking bitch. Hermes didn't know the true workings of prophecy. His brother had only told him that a prophecy was a blessing and a curse. It gives protection from destiny to the fated ones and also imposes a heavy price on them for it. Once a prophecy is uttered, it is destined to fulfilled one way or another. And he thought his brother could always pry into fate without any restrictions, but now it seems. Hermes made a mental note to delve into the specifics of prophecy and the fates. Brother. Hermes spoke softly in an attempt to comfort him. Artemis has returned. And see, you are worrying yourself too much right after you advised me to be otherwise. He chuckled to lighten the heaviness. You aren't really setting up much of an example as a big brother. Apollo looked at him, his hardened countenance softened ever so slightly. I wish it will be fine. He faltered. It will be. Hermes said. He was surprised at the situation. It was only moments ago that his brother was comforting him, but here he was doing the same to his brother. We gods really have a lot of baggage, don't we? Apollo's gaze hardened again, though with hesitation, as though he wanted to say something pessimistic to break the optimism, but in the end he looked away, deciding otherwise. Hermes knew his brother's worry was very justified. It was not just his pessimistic side influencing him. Artemis' quest was extremely dangerous. Father issued it to her, to scout the edges of the 9 realms and collect as much information as possible on the realms. The war initiated by Odin showed no sign of stopping despite the next realm in his conquest being Muspelheim, which is ruled by Surtur, the primordial god of fire. This development sent a wave of uneasiness throughout the divine realms of the gods. A war involving a primordial is the last thing anyone wants. The consequences and damages brought by that level of battle were too much. Their father and other Skyfathers had tried to persuade Odin, but the All-Father ignored their attempts and was intent on his bloody conquest. The rulers couldn't sit still any longer, and they sent scouts from their pantheons to the edges of 9 realms to assess the situation and gather information about war. As long as they don't cross the boundaries and intrude into 9 realms, there won't much of a problem. Odin would turn a blind eye to them. Naturally, in their pantheon, the duty falls on the shoulders of Artemis, the goddess of hunt. Their father, though, didn't force it on her as an order but left it to her choice considering the extreme danger involved in the quest. For reasons unknown to Hermes, Artemis actually accepted the quest. And as one might already guess, Apollo and Artemis had a huge argument. He didn't want Artemis to go on that quest, but the goddess of the hunt was as stubborn as a mule. It finally ended in a compromise, under the persuasion of their mother, Leto. Apollo somehow managed to convince the primordial goddess of night to grant Artemis a concealment blessing. His brother is truly the god of miracles, isn't he? And also granted her his own blessing as a diamond amulet of protection. With all the blessings and powers, there really shouldn't be problems with the quest of Artemis, but Hermes is not so certain on it anymore. Hermes looked up at his brother. Apollo walked away from him and leaned on the pillar outside of the tavern with closed eyes. Hermes didn't disturb Apollo and gave him some well-needed space. He searched for any new messages in his bag with his divinity, one from Eros, one from Hebe, one from Phobos, and so on. He picked up all the scrolls from his bag and imbued some of his travel divinity into the wind, letting it carry the messages to their preordained destination. As he watched the last scroll fly away in the wind, he caught the silver moon flashing into existence with brilliant argent light in the sky. In the light of the moon, Artemis materialized. The argent light veil unfolded all around her as she walked toward them. The goddess of the moon looked no different than he had seen her last time, or so he thought until she opened her platinum eyes, which always used to be bright and pure as the moon but now were dim and filled with weariness. Hermes' heart sank. Brother. Artemis exhaled, a relieved smile tugged on her lips. Hermes appeared in front of Artemis and put on his signature quirky smile in an attempt to lessen the volatile heaviness in the air. It's been a while, moon girl. He said. Hasn't it? It's been 8 years. Artemis smiled. And it is always delightful to see you too, Hermes. Her tone was so genuine, so caring, and so un-Artemis, making Hermes momentarily fall silent in shock. Apollo peered at Artemis, his arms crossed and his brows creased together ever so slightly in concern as his brilliant golden eyes met her dimmed platinum eyes, then his eyes trailed toward empty neck where the amulet should have been. And his molten eyes darkened. The golden sun on the horizon turned scorching white. The air around them and most of the world was boiling as though a supernova was brewing within it. It also jolted Hermes, and he held his breath. Artemis immediately ran and hugged his brother tightly. Instantly, everything cooled down in the cold moonlight. The terrifying aura of sun waned away bathed in the argent light. The blazing sun returned to its golden perpetuity. "I am fine," she whispered. "I am fine, brother. Tell me everything." Apollo caressed her hair, and his surging golden eyes calmed a little. "Let's go inside." Artemis left his embrace. "I will recount with the drinks. We may really need it." "Idiot." She turned and looked at Hermes, who was standing there in indecision and awkwardness. "Why are you not coming?" Apollo deadpanned at his brother. And Hermes immediately flashed to them spouting a big grin and his hands combined behind his head. Then, he looked at the goddess of moon up and down with raised brows. "Get your eyes off me, Hermes." Artemis scowled. "Or you will never know where my arrows could land." "Ah." Hermes smiled, instinctively clamping his thighs. "There is the moon girl, I know. I was almost afraid that you were some alien in her skin." "Enough." Apollo scolded and dragged them into Persephone Tavern through the swaying flower gate. Chapter 66, Unraveling Destiny. The Persephone Tavern was packed with extraordinary beings celebrating the Olympics in honor of Athena. From nymphs to satyrs to minor gods, everyone was watching the ensuing games and betting on their favorite mortals. Apollo, Artemis, and Hermes got themselves a special and secluded box that was exclusive for esteemed guests and ordered drinks to the nymph waiter, who looked all too nervous receiving their orders. And Apollo enchanted their box with his order authority, preventing anyone from prying or spying on them. Then there was complete silence. None bothered to speak. Hermes began to fiddle with his new gadgets, and Artemis cleaned her already pristine silver bow, Stella, while they often spared glances at their brother, who was looking out the stained window at the rising sun. Apollo turned to face them. They immediately looked away, attempting to appear ambivalent. The sun god could feel their nervousness, prompting him to internally sigh. His emotions almost went out of control at the sight of his weary sister. The diamond amulet of protection that he tied around her neck was gone. Despite his best efforts to protect and conceal her, she encountered mortal danger on her task, just as he had feared. His little sister's task was dangerous and full of unknowns. He had a bad feeling about it as soon as he heard the news, and he instinctively tried to probe destiny for answers, but all he found was chaos. The results did not surprise him, but it did give him a pang of frustration. He was fateless, and his actions and existence weakened the fates of those close to him by a significant degree. Hecate's fate had already been severed, and the rest of his family's fate was on the verge of unraveling. He even had a significant impact on the fates of his angels. Aside from the fact that it brought him great relief, it also meant that his prophetic abilities frequently failed when it involved his family. The fateless were the true harbingers of chaos on the tapestry of necessity. He admits to being somewhat reliant on his destiny-related divinities. It always gave him the upper hand over others. Apollo had pushed thoughts of destiny aside and concentrated on his premonition. It didn't matter if he found nothing, but he could tell his sister was in for a tough road to the 9 realms. So he did the obvious. He tried to talk her out of her dangerous task, but his sister was obstinate. She knew of his strength, and that revelation had greatly frustrated her. He should have kept his braggart mouth shut while they were on vacation in the wilderness. "We are twins," Artemis had said. The sun and moon were said to always go hand in hand. "So, why am I so weak in contrast to you?" Apollo was stumped for an answer to her question. How should he respond? Even he is not certain who granted him his authorities. And as one thing led to another, there was a large argument on the table. For reasons unknown to him, his little sister believed that by abandoning everything on earth and embarking on the quest to the 9 realms, she would gain strength. The disparity in strength between them frightened and frustrated her, and while he understood her feelings, he would not approve of her rash and irresponsible actions. Artemis stood firm and was persistent in her actions and beliefs, as she had always been. It was something he had always admired about his sister, but he loathed it now. Apollo could see her frustration in her eyes and voice as she yelled at him, the frustration with herself, with her frailty, with her weakness. It was excruciating to hear. He truly wanted to help his sister with her strength, but breaking the limits of divinity was never simple. It took Hecate her entire being to break free from the shackles of divinity. And the path of liberation he had envisioned for his little sister will be even more difficult. To break free from the shackles of her divinity and walk freely on her divine path, she would have to slay and absorb the divinities of all moon gods and goddesses to ascend to become the primordial goddess of the moon. She didn't have his advantage, nor did she have his authority. He hadn't mentioned this path to his sister. Apollo could only guess what she'd do if he said it. Despite her pragmatism, she also has her own share of extreme recklessness. He didn't want to see his sister get hurt. Artemis was his twin, and though she may have been born first, it was hard not to call her little sister when she was most always in the form of a preteen. Regardless, he wanted to be the older sibling. He always wanted to protect her, and he never wanted to see her hurt. Anyone that tried to hurt her, in any way, was going to experience hell, courtesy of Apollo. His protectiveness of her and everything else came back to bite him as he argued with his sister to a deadlock. Thankfully, their mother arrived just in time to save the day and talk some sense into his little sister, or so he thought until their mother refused to take either of their sides and forced them to reconcile. Finally, they found common ground. Apollo journeyed to the realm of night, where he met Nyx and her dark children, truly a unique bunch. He requested the blessing of concealment from Nyx for his sister. She agreed, the benefits of being allies. It would be an understatement to call Nyx's concealment divinity powerful, it was far more than that. The primordial goddess of night has the ability to conceal things, turning them into a state of secrecy. The things she could conceal vary from her own self to environments, identities, actions, people, contents, and even rules and concepts of reality itself. Even the other primordials wouldn't be able to see through her concealment. It was overpowering and also perfect for his sister's task. Though the blessing from Nyx will be only a watered-down version of true concealment, it should be more than enough to protect her safety. But, just in case, he crafted a diamond amulet imbued with his and their mother's power and tied it around her neck for her protection. He even wanted to add his summoning function, but Artemis refused, instead changing it so she could use it to return home at any time. It should be enough. He had foolishly thought as he watched her depart with their mother to the 9 realms. Your orders, your excellencies. A wood nymph said, pulling him away from his thoughts. She placed the glasses of nectar tremblingly and shuffled away. Hermes packed away his gadgets and handed the glasses to Apollo and Artemis. They took it, and Artemis gulped it down all at once. Take it easy, Hermes chastised as her empty glass refilled itself. Artemis nodded absent-mindedly and drank another glass, this time more slowly. Apollo said, after she had somewhat calmed down. Tell us everything. As Apollo and Hermes leaned forward in their seats, Artemis began recounting her journey in between drinks. The war of the 9 realms was deteriorating. For centuries, Asgard has been fighting alone against the other realms. The weaker realms had fallen under the might of Asgard within a few decades. The war against the remaining realms, Vanaheim, Jotunheim, Svartalfheim, and Muspelheim, was, however, the most difficult challenge Asgard had ever faced. Odin had to personally lead the army to Vanaheim and Svartalfheim for the war. But even in the face of Odin's might and power, Vanaheim did not surrender. The Vanir would rather die gloriously in battle than surrender like Svartalfheim's cowards. Given that Freyr, the leader of Vanir, would never surrender and was willing to sacrifice his people in the war, Odin proposed a truce in the form of his marriage to Frigga, the Vanir goddess of the hunt, magic, prophecy, and motherhood, in order to unite their realms under his banner. Freyr didn't have much of a choice but to marry away his beloved daughter, so he agreed, despite knowing full well that Vanaheim would become a vassal of Asgard. Odin then turned his attention to Jotunheim and Muspelheim, the realms of ice and fire, after conquering Vanaheim and Svartalfheim. The Allfather chose to conquer Jotunheim first, and the war there was terrible, even worse than the previous wars. Stars, planets, and star systems were being destroyed almost every day, and Odin hasn't even entered the battlefield. The repercussions of the war between Asgard and Jotunheim had even begun to affect Earth, all of the Milky Way, and the nearby galaxies. And it gradually began to worry the gods. Odin showed no signs of desiring to stop his expansion despite the fact that he was about to face Surtur next, the primordial god of fire, who wielded flames powerful enough to burn the entire universe in its crimson embers. The Council of Godheads does not want a battle involving a primordial since it could potentially tear apart the entire universe. So they had been trying to persuade Odin on this, but all their efforts had been fruitless. The rulers couldn't sit still any longer, and they sent scouts from their pantheons to the edges of 9 realms to assess the situation and gather information about war. As long as they don't cross the boundaries and intrude into the 9 realms, there won't be much of a problem. Odin would turn a blind eye to them. Naturally, in their pantheon, Zeus issued the quest to Artemis to let her scout the edges of the realms, except for Asgard, Vanaheim, and Muspelheim, to collect information on the overall situation of the war. Artemis accepted the quest and entered the universe. She had departed the Milky Way through the portals in the omnipotent city to travel to the 9 realms. She approached the rim of the 9 realms with the caution of a huntress. She traveled to various worlds and observed nature in each of them, as well as their differences and peculiarities. She was attempting to connect with the nature of the universe while simultaneously scouting and gathering information on the state of the weaker realms. Everything was going well, and she even managed to gain some strength through nature, but things began to fall apart at her final destination, Jotunheim. Her timing couldn't have been worse. The War of the 9 Realms was reaching a boiling point in Jotunheim, and Hela and Laufey were expected to enter the battlefield for the decisive battle. So you got involved in the war? Hermes guessed silently. Sort of, Artemis nodded tiredly. I was forced to join in the war. She inhaled deeply and continued her recount. The war was coming to an end. The armies of Asgard and Jotunheim had already retreated to safety. Hela, the goddess of death, arrived on Fenrir to face Laufey, the king of frost giants, for the final battle that will determine the victor of the war. I had just arrived on the edges of Jotunheim when Hela and Laufey exchanged their first blows. Hela instantaneously brought death upon a nearby star, causing it to explode in a supernova. She then harvested energy of the supernova and directed it at Laufey as a beam. The king of the frost giants also attacked Hela. The giant unleashed a colossal ice sword the size of Jupiter, causing the surrounding environments to reach the temperature of absolute zero. I wanted to retreat and continue the task as soon as they finished their battle. I was circumspect. However, she came to a halt, her gaze fixed on her brother. He was just staring at her, his expression unreadable. She then went on, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Laufey found me. He saw right through the night's concealment, I'm not certain how he did it, and immediately attacked me. Chapter 67, Necessity. I wanted to retreat and continue the task as soon as they finished their battle. I was circumspect. However, Artemis came to a halt, her gaze fixed on her brother. He was just staring at her, his expression blank. She then went on, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Laufey found me. He saw right through the night's concealment, I'm not certain how he did it, and immediately attacked me. And you went up against him, didn't you? As the air around them blazed and scorched, Apollo interpreted, his molten golden eyes glowing with cosmic fire. What else was I supposed to do, brother? Artemis yelled in disbelief, pounding the table with her hands. The glass next to her shattered, splattering nectar all over the table. Calm your horses, my dear siblings. Hermes immediately interpreted, pressing his hands on both of their shoulders. He also swept his gaze across the spilled wine, causing it to vanish in the breeze. The world may not be able to bear it. They calmed down. Nonetheless, Apollo chastised his sister. You are so reckless, Artemis. After night's concealment failed, you should have immediately used my pendant to teleport back to Earth. Don't you understand? He scowled. Someone is manipulating everything in the shadows. They wanted Laufey to find you. I didn't have the luxury to think it through. Artemis spoke quietly. He was already on me, brother, and I needed to make a move, so I attacked him. Apollo sighed exasperatedly, his hands on his temples. Artemis went on, her gaze fixed on her brother. I fought Laufey, and he was stronger than me, albeit by a small margin. I summoned a small cosmic storm with my nature divinity for my first blow. You did what? Hermes felt like he heard it wrong. I told you, Artemis boasted, her gaze fixed on Apollo. I wasn't just scouting in the universe, I also tried to connect with the nature of the universe. I was somewhat successful in my endeavor. Her brother was simply staring at her, not with the proud expression he always had when she showed him her accomplishments. She then huffed and continued, I summoned the cosmic storm at Laufey, but he froze it with his ice and shattered it into ice particles. Then he raised his sword in preparation for his attack, and I knocked an arrow in my bow. However, before we could continue to fight, Hela interpreted us. I was afraid she'd team up with Laufey to deal with me, the intruder. However, much to my relief and surprise, she sided with me. Artemis took note that her brother's shoulders sagged with her last words. And we went all out right away. I didn't want to hold back anymore, and Hela reciprocated my feelings. Hela dispatched her ride, Fenrir, to keep Laufey occupied while we decided to combine our powers. We took on our divine forms. And I summoned the moon on Jotunheim, and Hela spread her death divinity into infinity of space, connecting with all the star systems surrounding Jotunheim. And she brought death to the stars, causing everything to explode in a supernova all at once. Hermes sat on the edge of his seat, holding his breath. Artemis said this with a slight sense of awe. I'm not sure how many stars exploded, 100,000, 1,000,000, 10 million, or even 100 million, but it was enough to shake the entire galaxy adjacent to Jotunheim. She then harvested the entire energies from the supernovas and held them out to me in her hand. I could tell she was reaching her limits by suppressing the volatile stellar energy, so I immediately brought the moon I summoned above her hand. Then, I began purifying the energy of supernovas, curbing its volatility, increasing its stellar essence, increasing its power, and increasing its might as much as I could. Meanwhile, the king of frost giants finally managed to get rid of Fenrir. The wolf was thrown at us by him. It was in its last breath. Hela managed to spare some of her attention and teleported her wolf back to her army. At the same time, our attack was ready, and without hesitation, we blasted the purified energy of millions of supernovas at the face of Laufey. The giant king did not appear surprised. He even had a smile on his face as he faced our attack with confidence. Our attack hit him and hurled him to the other side of the galaxy, oblivionizing everything in its path, a large part of the galaxy, billions of planets, millions of stars, and tens of thousands of fledgling civilizations, all melted into nothingness. Artemis flattered, her words catching in the throat. Apollo took her hand in his and squeezed it gently. Hermes poured another glass for Artemis, who drank it in one gulp. Don't try to blame yourself, sister. Apollo said, his voice softening slightly. There has never been a bloodless war. Artemis nodded tiredly and continued, but her voice was hard. The galaxy was almost torn apart under our attack. In the midst of the cosmic upheaval, Hela and I remained vigilant. Despite our all-out assault, I had an instinct that he wasn't dead. My fears were immediately confirmed. Laufey appeared in front of us, and scathed, with a viscous smile, she paused. I couldn't believe my eyes. I then noticed he had something in his hands. She rested her hand on her temples. It was an artifact, a blue casket, and the mere sight of it sent chills down my spine. Hela also paled at the sight of the artifact, her eyes wide as if she didn't anticipate that Laufey would have the casket. I quickly realized what the casket was. Laufey barraged it at us with complete confidence. He claimed it was the casket of ancient winters that contained the divine essence of Ymir, the primordial god of ice. The artifact was said to have been lost in time, but Laufey somehow discovered it. He didn't elaborate on that detail. Artemis took a deep breath to rest. I didn't wait until he finished his monologue. I knew that once the artifact was activated, I and Hela would perish. Our power meant a little against such a primal force of the universe. So I grabbed the pendant you gave me, brother, she said as she looked at Apollo. And activated your protection. The pendant hurled a fusillade of golden chains at Laufey. He was taken off guard and bound by it. Laufey's divinity was completely suppressed by the chains, rendering him powerless. However, the casket began to activate on its own after noticing his predicament. As the ice coated it, the chains began to break. But, my goal had already been met. I wanted to buy some time so that we could safely return to Earth. I asked Hela to accompany me, but the goddess of death shook her head and pointed above. When I looked up, I saw a rainbow beam hurling towards us, and in it, I glimpsed the silhouette of a god wielding a golden spear and riding a white, eight-winged Pegasus. It was All-Father, Odin. Hela told me to go. She said it would be foolish to face her father, especially when he is enraged, and that she would vouch for me with her father. I didn't dither any longer. I activated the pendant and returned to Earth. Artemis completed. Then I immediately went to Olympus and informed Father about everything that had happened. He had left for the omnipotent city to meet with Odin to deal with the fallout of the broken non-interference agreement. A heavy silence fell over all of them. Hermes fidgeted with his cup, swirling it, Artemis shifted in her seat, and Apollo continued to stare at his sister. Say something. Artemis demanded at Apollo, as his fixed stare was beginning to unnerve her. Well, Apollo said, his voice sharpening with such force that both Hermes and Artemis were taken aback. Laufey is going to die, and I'm going to tell our mother, sister, about your recklessness, word by word. No. Artemis and Hermes spoke in unison for different reasons. Please, brother. The goddess of the moon begged. Don't tell mother. Brother. The god of deceit pointed this out logically. Consider the consequences and danger. The situation is already bad. If you try to kill Laufey, things will spiral even deeper into chaos and war. I've made my decision. Apollo spoke in a tone that left no room for discussion. Hermes tensed. Despite his brother's expressionless face, he could practically feel the rage emanating from him. He was afraid Apollo would simply decide to disregard the consequences and dangers. He knew his brother was powerful, far more powerful than him, but Laufey possessed a primordial artifact. Do something, Hermes. He chastised himself. Think something, Hermes. A sudden thought passed through his head, and he immediately brought it up. Brother, we can make Laufey pay in time. Hermes spoke slowly, observing his brother's reaction. There's a bigger issue, the manipulator. I understand your rage. But calm yourself, brother, Artemis added, gently taking her brother's hands in hers. I don't want you to be as reckless as I was. Apollo took a deep breath and closed his molten eyes. Hermes and Artemis sighed with relief. They wouldn't be able to stop him if they gave in to his rage. The sun will also resonate with his emotions, and the entire world will burn with him. So. Hermes shifted his weight in his seat. Anyone have an idea who the manipulator in the shadows might be? You know it. Artemis inquired, her gaze fixed on Apollo. Don't you, brother? Apollo blinked, his golden eyes open. Fates, he said gravely, it is the kindly ones. He went into great detail without allowing them to interrupt him. He revealed how he was fateless and how his existence tore the fabric of necessity, weakening fate itself. He claimed that their fates were on the verge of unraveling as well, and that the kindly ones were out for his blood for merely escaping their control and binding them to their knees. The fates even have a pawn in their pantheon, and they were plotting his demise through that pawn. He then stated that the fates most likely desired chaos so that they could weave without being bound by the rules of destiny. Artemis, who is almost fateless, will cause chaos with every action she takes. That's why they should have revealed her existence to Laufey and perhaps manipulated him into fighting her. The non-interference agreement between Asgard and Olympus would have been broken in the end, and if worse came to worst, there would be an interpanthean war. Apollo concluded by saying that these were just his guesses, but even if he was wrong about some of them, they should be closer to the truth. Oh, Gaia. Hermes' hands flew to his chest. That was a lot to take in. Artemis was frozen in her seat, rooted in her place. She was re-examining and questioning her entire existence. She was the harbinger of what? Don't be too worried. Apollo soothed. They cannot directly interfere. They are too constrained by their own set of rules, and even if they manage to break free, our universe is home to cosmic beings far more powerful than them. Are the kindly ones truly cosmic beings? Hermes inquired, then confusedly waved his hands. First and foremost, what exactly is a cosmic being? Artemis somehow gathered herself from existential shock and leaned forward in her seat solemnly. You remember what I said about the multiverse? Apollo brought up past topics. About how infinite and boundless it is. Yes. Hermes jested. The time you made our existence feel so unspecial. How could I possibly forget that, brother? Artemis threw him a glare, and he wisely went silent, complaining under his breath. We do. She corrected him. Brother. To put it simply, a cosmic being is an entity that embodies a concept of the infinite multiverse. Morpheus, the dream of the endless, for example, embodies the concept of dream. Apollo said as slowly as possible, letting the information sink into their minds. They listened with rapt attention. The kindly ones embody the concept of necessity, an aspect of destiny, of the infinite multiverse. Under the cosmic entities, the fates control the fates of all beings in the multiverse. A beat of heavy silence passed. Artemis breathed out. You have carried this heavy burden all alone, for Gaia knows for how long. You could have said something. You don't get it, Artemis. Apollo shook his head. The kindly ones are far more powerful than you can fathom. In terms of power and status, I am nothing more than an ant in contrast to them. Artemis flinched, and her eyes widened. She couldn't believe the words that her ever-narcissistic and ever-arrogant brother had just uttered. Apollo took her hand in his and squeezed it gently. They are beyond me. But I'm still fighting them with hope, and it's costing me dearly every time. He took a deep breath and looked at Hermes and Artemis. I didn't mean to tell you both this. I don't want you to suffer because of me. But everything changed now, and it is better if you know the enemy that I am going to face. Not I, Artemis corrected. We. Oh. Apollo said, Artemis. Brother, Hermes cut in sharply. Stop trying to push us out. We are your family. Well, a relieved yet restrained smile crept onto the lips of Apollo. For the time being, there is no dealing with fates. They are far too powerful for us to handle. We should concentrate on their pawn in our pantheon. How powerful are the kindly ones? Hermes inquired, his voice quivering slightly in fear. The kindly ones can, Apollo described. Weave the fate of apocalypse for the cosmos if it is a necessity, thus bringing an end to the infinite multiverse. Though they, too, will perish with the cosmos. How can the apocalypse of the multiverse be a necessity? Hermes asked. Hermes, sighed Apollo. Every beginning has an ending. Hermes was lost for words. He leaned back, his face pale and bloodless. Artemis managed to recover from the shock yet again. Let's forget about the kindly ones. She brought the subject back to their level, and focus on their pawn in our pantheon. So. She went on. Who is it, brother? Our father. Apollo answered. Zeus. That name sank into existence. The expressions of Artemis and Hermes were graver than ever, but there wasn't much surprise in their eyes. How do we deal with our fate-protected father? Hermes spoke up immediately, as if he couldn't wait to be done with their wretched father, though his still pale face betrayed his tone. You expected it? Apollo raised his brows as he watched their reactions. Brother, said Artemis. It was always said the fates favored our father. Even once you yourself mentioned that. Apollo nodded and looked at Hermes, answering his question. There is no we, only I, father is too powerful. He can simply slap you into oblivion. Hermes looked hurt at that, but he didn't protest. As for the fate's protection, I'm still trying to figure out how to go around it and even find out what their true plan is with our father. What do you want us to do? After a brief pause, Artemis inquired. If you have an opinion, or if you have anything on the protections of fates, you can share it with me. Apollo paused, looking at her with solemn eyes. And when the time finally comes, you both can deal with Hera. Hera? Hermes asked. Don't underestimate Hera. Apollo chastised. She may be a bitch, but still, she is one of the most powerful gods in the divine realms. He admitted it begrudgingly. Father didn't make her the queen of Olympus just out of love. We will face her, brother. Artemis accepted it confidently for both of them, her hatred visible in her eyes. Hermes nodded vehemently in agreement, then asked quietly. But what about our aunts and uncles? Will they side with us? About them. Apollo furrowed his brows. However, before he could continue, someone interpreted them. Knock. It's Aunt Demeter. Artemis peered at the door. Apollo nodded and exchanged glances with them. The meaning is clear, we will continue afterwards. Artemis and Hermes leaned on their seats, some relief washing over their heaviness. They had truly had enough of this for today. Come in, Aunt, Apollo said. Demeter entered with a solemn countenance that she rarely had. She came to a halt, sensing the heaviness in the air, and frowned at them. Am I interpreting something? Brother, Hermes smiled, was just talking about carrying on our family tradition by himself. Artemis rolled her eyes, but her lips rose lightly to form a suppressed smile. Which family tradition? Demeter asked quizzically. Nothing important, Aunt. Apollo glared at Hermes, then turned to Demeter. What happened? Demeter thankfully didn't press and revealed the information gravely. Zeus called for the council. We could be facing a war. Chapter 68, A Great Prophecy. Thankfully, they avoided war, and he could finally spend time with Hecate in peace. Under the brilliance of millions of stars, Apollo lay on the lap of his love. The night was filled with peace and tranquility. It wrapped around him like a blanket, soothing his troubled heart. Hecate leaned against the balcony pillar, her hands caressing his hair as she gazed silently at the dark sky flecked with specks of light. Stargazing, it was something both he and Hecate loved to do. They would sit in silence for hours, watching the night sky. It was just too beautiful, to the point where even his words as a god of poetry couldn't do it true justice. It was something that had to be seen to truly comprehend its splendor. He and Hecate were on the balcony of his castle, his home on Delos, and his mother and sister live right next door in their own castle. They all live in Delos, though his sister prefers to spend her time in the wild camping out with her hunters. She is a true wilderness woman, and his mother prefers to stay in Delphi, where she oversees the Delphi oracle. He had given his mother the gift of prophecy as she was so passionate about guiding mortals and demigods to a better ending, and also leads her organization of healers as goddess of medicine. So most of the time over the years, he and Hecate have had the divine island all to themselves. Apollo looked at the ethereal spokes of light in the dark ocean of the sky and plucked one of them. A brilliant ball of light was present, pulsing with energy, in between his fingers. It was a star, a real star. Hecate took the star from his grasp and gazed pensively at it and the sky, clearly puzzled as to how a star could be plucked from millions of light years away and transmitted to Earth in an instant, let alone in this tiny form. Apollo let her delve into its mystery and refocus on the night sky. His mind drifted back a few hours to the convened Council of Gods in Olympus. He, Hermes, Artemis, and Demeter all went to the Council of the Gods together. They entered the throne room, which was submerged in an ocean of heaviness. Except for Zeus and Hera, everyone had arrived, putting their duties aside for the emergency meeting. Poseidon filled them in on the news. He and Hera had traveled to Omnipotent City with Zeus to meet with Odin. The Allfather demanded an explanation from Zeus on the intrusion of his sister. It had been pretty clear to Odin that Artemis was under her father's orders. Zeus gave a half-hearted explanation that it was self-defense on the part of Artemis. It was Hera and Poseidon who supplemented the Lord of the Sky to make it look at least believable. Odin, thankfully, did not press on it. The Allfather didn't want another war, let alone one between pantheons. But he still demanded an oath from Zeus. The Lord of the Sky would never interfere with Asgard's affairs again. Under the persuasion of Hera, Zeus finally swore the oath begrudgingly. Though Poseidon didn't say it explicitly, Apollo could tell his father was passive-aggressive throughout the meeting, as if he wanted the war to escalate, as if he wanted destruction, as if he wanted chaos. As the memories flashed through his mind, Apollo took a deep breath. The council convened immediately after Poseidon's recount, with Zeus and Hera arriving. The meeting lasted for only an hour with just another recap from Artemis on her task, and it ended with Zeus's order on an ominous note that they should be prepared for the coming turbulent times. His message couldn't have been more obvious to everyone. After the council, Apollo didn't forget to drag his sister to his mother and report on her recklessness. Let's just say Artemis is in big trouble based on his mother's hardened expression after his report. Though the war did not escalate this time, Apollo could see it happening in the future. However, the destiny on this path was clouded, preventing him from prying any farther. Most likely, it should be courtesy of none other than those cosmic hags. Now comes the big question, what did he do in all of this? Nothing. Yes, he had the power to intervene, but doing so would have only exacerbated the situation. He didn't have the might to suppress the entire situation and prevent the ensuing chaos. The fury he felt after listening to his sister's story almost caused him to lose control of his emotions yet again. He wanted to rush into the 9 realms and kill Laufey right then and there for daring to lay his filthy hands on his sister. He didn't want to care about the consequences. The rational part of his mind and the words of his siblings helped him extinguish the raging emotions and thoughts. Chaos. It was something he couldn't afford. If he stormed into the 9 realms to try to kill Laufey, there would almost certainly be war between Asgard and Olympus, which would completely disrupt everything. Regardless, Laufey will die in his hands one way or another, maybe not now but surely in the future. And the real perpetrators behind the shadows still remain. The kindly ones, the fates, the 3 in 1. His heart erupted with a mix of rage and powerlessness. What upsets you? Hecate jolted him out of his trance. Apollo raised his head to look at her. She held the ball of light, the star, with a smile on her face, as if she had solved its mystery. It's the same old. Apollo took the star from her grasp and returned it to its original place in the night sky, where he had plucked it. It will be fine. Hecate kissed his brow. That's the issue. Apollo sighed. It's not going to be fine. Hecate peered at him. What did you find, Apollo? I believe. Apollo took a breather. No, I am certain that the fates were behind this whole mess. They want chaos to get leverage over destiny. Hecate was not surprised by the revelation. She gripped his hands tightly and gazed down into his golden, molten eyes. You have bound the fates. She pointed to his heart. You did it, Apollo, not with power but with your brilliant mind. So, have faith in yourself. At what cost, my love? Apollo locked his gaze on her. I sacrificed much the first time. I don't know what it will be for the next. We will bear it together. Hecate said it with such firmness that it caught Apollo by surprise. He will not let her bear it. As is their wont, the fates were cruel and callous. Even he is not certain of the price he had to pay, but it ought to be something excruciating. Hecate frowned. Even if he tried his best to conceal his hesitation, she noticed it. But before he could say anything to keep up his ruse, her lips were on his, but this kiss wasn't anything like their previous ones had been, mind you, they kiss a lot. It was cold and searing, it conveyed her emotions to him, her pain, determination, resolve, and love. Apollo immediately kissed her back, pouring his feelings into them. Their kiss was both hot and cold, it burned into the very depths of their souls, to places within themselves they had never been before. They separated breathlessly from the seemingly unending moment. Whoa! Apollo took a breath. That was amazing. Hecate finished for him, a beautiful smile on her haunting lips. I was aiming for intense. Apollo said. But it was also amazing. Even after all these years, Hecate, you are still full of surprises. His molten eyes darkened as he paused and closed in on her. Want to do it again? Hecate put her fingers on his lips, ready to refuse, but he opened his mouth and bit her fingers with a tantalizing smirk. Apollo. She gently chastised him, pulling her fingers away from his mouth. We're deviating from the topic at hand. Apollo sighed with disappointment. He couldn't get enough of her, no matter how much time passed. But he gathered himself and looked her in the eyes. I understand your feelings, my love. I understand your desire to help me. But there are some things I'd rather face alone. Why are you always so obstinate? Hecate asked rhetorically, caressing his cheeks. Let me finish. Apollo took her hands in his and gently kissed her fingers. I don't want you to get hurt. Apollo. Hecate said, pulling her hands away from his lips. You can't always be there to protect me. Let me finish. Apollo repeated, taking a deep breath and continuing in a heavy voice. But, Hecate, I respect your choices as long as they are not reckless. I will not stop you, my love, if you have enough power to back up your words. A relieved smile bloomed brilliantly on Hecate's otherworldly lips. It's so good to hear that, she sighed. I've waited so long for you to say those words. I almost thought you would never say it to me. No. Apollo protested indignantly. Don't put it that way. You make me look so bad. Apollo. Hecate cut in sharply. Apollo sighed in defeat. You know, I always try to keep you out or in the dark because I just love you too much. I understand. I truly do, Apollo. Hecate leaned in, and they bumped foreheads. You said it all in our kiss. But, still, I don't want to be the one you leave at home under your protection before marching off to fight in the war, rather, I want to be the one who fights shoulder to shoulder with you as your partner. Her figure quivered. I'm just afraid that one day you'll leave and never return. I don't want to face that situation, let alone the possibility of it. I want to be there for you as well, and if you have to face death, I will follow you to the end. Apollo placed his hands over her mouth, silencing her. His golden, molten eyes blazed with such fury that the sun almost arose in the night sky. Never, ever say such things. Everything will be fine. We will see to it. He continued, not waiting for her reply. Hecate, I've considered you to be my equal. Apollo emphasized. Always. Hecate's heavy shoulders slumped. I think I am the luckiest woman in the cosmos to have you. I don't know what I did to deserve a man as amazing, marvelous, wonderful, and breathtaking as you. Oh. Apollo allowed himself a smile on heavy lips. Where did you pick up these corny lines? Hecate punched his chest gently. I am dead serious, Phoebus. Apollo's golden eyes darkened. He always loved it when she called him by his first name. But he still suppressed the growing urge in him and kissed her forehead. I know, my love, I know. A beat of comfortable silence passed. I hate to break this precious moment. Hecate exhaled a sigh. However, there are still pressing matters at hand. Why break it when you can pause it? The night is still young. Apollo smiled suggestively. Then let's pause it. Hecate didn't rebuke him, much to his bliss. Oh, this is going to be a long night. And focus on our enemy, the kindly ones. What are your plans? She inquired. First and foremost, I want my Hope Project to be approved by the Council of Godheads and the Universal Council. Apollo revealed his plans to her. I want my cosmic force to be in working order before the War of the Gods begins. It is simply too destructive. I want to limit the damage and keep as many civilizations out of our war as possible. Hecate tapped her lips with her fingers thoughtfully, and then she sighed in frustration. There is nothing I can do to help you with this. I will take care of the approvals with the councils. Apollo chuckled. However, I require your assistance with something else. Tell me. Hecate perked up right away. I want you to cast a great concealment spell on universal level. Apollo said hesitantly. It was too much to ask. He knows. With all of her preparations, Hecate will have galaxy-level power. And here he was, requesting that she cast a spell on the entire universe. The difference between galaxy level and universe level is so vast that it cannot even be quantified. But he knew she could accomplish it, albeit with the help of the Mother of Concealment. I can do it. Hecate immediately nodded, her eyes beaming with confidence. Though I will need help from Aunt Nyx to accomplish this. She will agree. Apollo nodded. You should know that we are allies. How did you convince Aunt to it anyway? Hecate asked with raised brows. I have my ways, Hecate. Apollo grinned. But if you're really curious, why don't you ask your aunt? Hecate merely snorted and steered back to the topic. You need the great concealment for your fight with your father. Apollo traced her chin with his finger. You know me so well, Hecate. It's quite surprising. Hecate pointedly ignored his honeyed words and then sighed. You finally made up your mind, huh? Yes. Apollo nodded, his soft eyes carried away in a tempest of solemnity. I have decided to confront our father. There will be no more waiting or tempting the fates. I intend to overthrow my father, killing him once and for all, and I want to do so without causing a civil war in our pantheon. The moment he absolutely made his choice, Apollo felt a tug in his prophecy divinity and he instinctively looked up at the night sky. He felt an incomprehensible gaze directed at him from the infinity of the cosmos. It was so powerful, so mighty, so ancient, so primal, that he remained of his own insignificance in the limitless cosmos once more. He had confronted the fates in their presence, but it couldn't hold a candle to what he was feeling at this never-ending moment. Apollo intuitively recognized who the gaze belonged to, Destiny, the eldest of endless, and with that realization, words flooded into his mind from the book of Destiny itself. He took a deep breath to center himself. He could faintly hear Hecate's worried voice calling out to him, but he was still trying to process Destiny's words. The words gradually began to make sense, as if the multiverse itself were assisting him in comprehending them. It would be an understatement to say he was shocked as the words of Destiny unveiled to him. He had not anticipated this at all. He couldn't figure out what to make of Destiny's intervention. But he was certain of one thing, he had to do this, for better or worse. Apollo opened his mouth and spoke the words of Destiny in a quiet, mythical voice. Son of lightning, beware of vengeance. The fates revenge, the Ilios shall emergence. Teneburs and night unite, raised while they're torn. Eternal darkness will rise, a cosmic power born. A great prophecy was uttered. At the same time, in a realm within the edges of the infinite multiverse bordering the boundless void, the sound of spinning, weaving, and cutting reverberated endlessly as the kindly ones, the embodiment of necessity, laced the fates of all beings in the multiverse, from birth to death. Every event in everyone's life was predetermined and woven into their tapestry of necessity by their hands. The fates suddenly stopped their duties and gazed at their infinite tapestry. Immediately, a part of the tapestry went ablaze in golden sun flames, slowly searing through the precious work of the fates. Destiny is too kind for his own good, murmured Clotho. He will pay, uttered Anatropus. With the rest of his treacherous family, added Lachesis. And we shall usurp his throne. They ended in unison. Their expressionless faces collapsed into vicious smiles of glee. Chapter 69, Decipher. Son of lightning, beware of vengeance. The fates revenge, the Ilios shall emergence. Teneburs and night unite, raised while they're torn. Eternal darkness shall rise, a cosmic power born. The moment the great prophecy was uttered by him, Apollo felt a shift in the river of destiny. The fates of countless people began to change in a drastic way, unlike anything he had seen before in the absoluteness of fate. Even as the god of prophecy and divination, he couldn't tell how many beings were affected by the great prophecy, a trillion, a quadrillion, a quintillion, a septillion. Perhaps it was meant to be that way, since something as powerful as destiny could never be quantified. It was not all. The shift in the river of destiny was immediately concealed before it could be noticed by any gods or goddesses in his universe. How was he certain of this? Destiny made his intentions very clear to him in his own omnipotent way. The gaze of destiny faded. And Apollo finally managed to get a grip on reality by suppressing most of his volatile emotions with order authority, entering a semi-rational state. He then turned to face his love. Hecate was frozen in place, her face becoming paler by the second. Apollo instinctively raised his hand to her cheeks to soothe her while also trying his best not to express his emotions on his face. He didn't want to worry her any more than she was already. Hecate locked her gaze on him. Was that a prophecy from? She flattered. Apollo took her hands in his and gently squeezed them. Yes, he confessed. It was a great prophecy from Destiny of Endless himself. How, though? Hecate was still in shock. Weren't we fateless? Fateless, yes. Apollo nodded. But I made a choice and chose a path. And Destiny responded to it. After all, it was his duty. Hecate inhaled deeply, attempting to calm herself. So the prophecy, the destiny, is it binding on us? She asked, though with a quivering voice that told all about her failure to compose herself for him. Freedom. It was something he and Hecate both desired. It was one of the few similarities between their very distinctive personalities. And the years Hecate had suffered under the shackles of divinity had made her even more sensitive to fate in general. She would cry herself to sleep on his shoulders, recalling the days before he came into her life. It had hurt his heart, and he had been trying to help her overcome her fears and demons. They had been working on it for a long time now, and she was slowly coming out of her shadow. Looking at her now, he could literally feel her slipping back into those shadows. Thank Gia, he was in a semi-rational state, suppressing most of his emotions, as witnessing her like this without it would have only exacerbated his chaotic heart. Apollo decided to let her see the fate itself. It was better than continuing to comfort her with words. He took her quivering hand in his and shared his perception of destiny with her. A warm sensation spread from their touch into their hearts. The power of destiny swirled around them like a tornado from the moment the great prophecy was spoken, without touching or binding them. But it was always there, showing no signs of fading away. Hecate gradually calmed down as she witnessed the power of destiny with him. Her quivering hand steadied as she tightened her grip on him. The shadows in her eyes began to fade. What does this mean? She asked, her eyes fixated on the swirling destiny. Excellent question. But it's a shame that even he could not give a conclusive answer. Apollo still revealed his educated guesses. As I previously stated, I made a choice and chose a path. Destiny is merely guiding us on our path with the prophecy. He even concealed our path from being known by other gods. Does this mean he knows how our path will end? Hecate quickly asked, her grip on him tightening even further. He certainly could. Apollo nodded. He may be aware of all the possible outcomes. However, the result should not be predetermined. Destiny does indeed guide our path, but in the end, we make the decisions. Apollo, the prophecy. Hecate whispered, finally turning to look at him. Will it be a blessing or a curse? Apollo stated unequivocally. For all we know, it could be either. But don't worry, we'll face whatever destiny has in store for us together. Hecate nodded and smiled tiredly. Then she tried to let go of his hands, but Apollo drew her into his hug and asked. Are you fine? I am. Hecate said it, and he could tell she meant it. Then she questioned. What about you? She narrowed her eyes at him and frowned. His mind immediately went, oh. Are you suppressing your emotions once again? Hecate gently pounded his heart. What were you thinking, you dimwit? Let it all out. Apollo sighed and let go of his suppressed emotions. It exploded in his being like a volcanic tide, scorching and scathing his body. He should seriously stop doing this. Like ever again. Hecate immediately kissed him, noticing his situation. Her cold lips pressed against his warm ones. A wave of coldness swept over him, extinguishing everything, and Apollo returned the kiss fiercely, his hands pulling her closer to him. They parted after what seemed like an eternity but still rested their foreheads on each other, though Hecate still bore her accusing gaze. Apollo sighed and acknowledged. I promise I won't try that again. You better. Hecate chastised. What were you thinking, seriously? Apollo kissed her gently and continued. Ever. Hecate's anger melted under his kiss and promise. Apollo pointed at the swirling destiny around them. Come on, let's decipher the great prophecy and see what destiny has in store for us. He allowed a smirk to form on his heavy lips. Hecate nodded and stepped out of his embrace. She then dragged him into their bedroom, and they sat at their dining table facing each other instead of near each other, as they had always used to. The goddess of magic waved her hands in the air. And the words of the great prophecy began to take shape out of the magic above their table with a thrum of magic. They stared at the prophecy. Nobody said anything, and the time passed in silence. Hecate decided to break it. The first part of the first line, son of lightning. She fixed her gaze on Apollo. The meaning is pretty obvious. Well, I am not only the son of Zeus. Apollo said. There's Hermes, Hephaestus, Ares, and 10 more I could think of off the top of my head. Apollo. Hecate grumbled. Fine. Apollo's hands were in the air. Sorry for trying to lighten the mood. Hecate focused her attention back on the prophecy. The second part, beware of. She faltered, her hands clutching the edges of her dark gown tightly. Vengeance. Apollo finished for her. Vengeance is a heavy and terrifying concept, rendered even more so when it involves fate. It is such a primal notion that it has the potential to override all rules and concepts in the right circumstances. A terrifying guess formed in his mind. Hecate and Apollo exchanged glances, their eyes shimmering in the same light. Hecate took his hand. I shouldn't say this after we've already started down this path. But if our guess is even remotely true, then... Hecate. Apollo intervened. He knew she wanted to reconsider after all this. The dreadful fact is that he understood where she was coming from. Vengeance was just that terrifying. But he clutched her hand tightly. We are not turning back. Hecate did not try to persuade him any further, instead, she stated unequivocally. Then we will find a way to deal with vengeance. Apollo smiled as her optimism infected him, but his heavy eyes betrayed him. If only it were that simple. Vengeance. He said, putting a stop to his thoughts. We should concentrate on the remaining prophecy first, Hecate, and leave that until we have a complete picture. Hecate nodded, accepting his explanation. But, judging by her slumped shoulders, he suspected she also didn't want to delve into vengeance any further right now. Apollo snapped his fingers, and 2 cups of green tea appeared on the table. He grabbed 1 cup and passed the other to Hecate. It's an excellent remedy for stress and tension. Hecate drank her tea, gazing at the words of prophecy thrumming in the air. The second line, the fate's revenge, the Ilios shall emergence. It is related to my son authority. In between sips, Apollo deciphered. Fate's revenge should lead to the emergence of Ilios, the true son. Your son authority? Hecate inquired, puzzled. I understand the distinction between divinity and authority. But what does that have to do with the emergence of Ilios? My bad. Apollo scratched the back of his neck. I should have been more specific. He had just told her the basics of authority, that it was the evolution of divinity. Even that explanation would not do authority a justice, as even the primordials, who control a primal force of the universe, have only divinity. It's simply a higher level of the same thing, a better version of the same object. And it still has similar restrictions and limitations of its own. But authority is a different story altogether. It essentially grants him the first claim to the concepts of reality without any restrictions. He may not have complete control over the concepts, but his ownership is always present. This is the situation for his sun and light authorities, but it is slightly more complicated for his order authority since it involves cosmic power. My authorities, Apollo said as he leaned forward in his chair. Grant me a first claim over the concepts of reality. To put things into perspective, my sun authority allows me to seize complete control of the sun, overriding the divinities and wills of other sun gods and goddesses in the sun. By doing so, I will immediately ascend to become the primordial of sun, and my power will grow to the universal level. Apollo spread his hands. Oh, how he wished it wasn't night, since he could have willed the sun to shine brightly on him. I am Ilios, the embodiment of the sun. Wait, Hecate raised her hand, trying to process his words. Let me get this straight. You could become a primordial anytime you want. Yes. Apollo glanced at the night sky, rubbing his chin. Even right now, he turned back to her. If I really want to, that is. Hecate bit her lower lip. That's so. She flattered, her eyes filled with guilt over what she intended to say. That's so unfair. Apollo finished for her in his mind. Hecate took a deep breath. I am sorry, I shouldn't have said. It is fine, Hecate. Apollo shook his head. Life was never fair, was it? What truly matters is that we fight back against whatever it throws at us, no matter how hopeless and despairing it may appear. How do you do that? Hecate gave a small smile and then answered her own question. Always having the right words for every situation. You extol me, my love. Apollo answered. I just know you with all my heart. Hecate's smile deepened at this. She took her half-empty cup of soothing tea near her and drank it. Apollo looked at the prophecy. Let's continue. Hecate nodded. She repeated the second line. Fate's revenge, the Ilios shall emergence. She then turned to face him. I now understand everything. You will eventually ascend to become the primordial god of the sun, and all sun gods and goddesses will lose their divinity. This was why you were so insistent about starting the war of the gods. I was under the impression that you intended to kill all sun gods and goddesses in the war and absorb their divinities. That is the path I intended for my sister. Apollo acknowledged. And you are right. One way or another, war is unavoidable. I could have ascended in the past, but it would have resulted in chaos that I couldn't control or deal with. I may be able to suppress all the gods in the war with my primordial power, but if other primordials decide to put aside their differences and besiege me, neither I nor the universe could possibly survive it. That's why I'm waiting for the right moment. Hecate finally deciphered after hearing him. The second line of prophecy implies that your right moment will arrive with the Fate's revenge. The revenge of Fates most likely could involve your father too. So everything converges on your eventual confrontation with your father. She went on, looking at him for confirmation. And Ilios will be born. Perhaps. Apollo was skeptical. Perhaps not. A prophecy could have numerous interpretations and undertones. He paused. If you ask me personally, the right time for me to ascend to the primordial of the sun is not during the battle with my father. That is a recipe for disaster and chaos. He can already imagine Izanami and Izanagi bursting onto the battlefield to demand justice for their daughter. Yeah, it is definitely a recipe for disaster and chaos. So. Hecate pressed her lips together with a frown. When is the best time for you? The right time, Apollo said, could perhaps come after I become the god king of Olympus. Apollo. Hecate took a deep breath and then chastised him. Stop trying to be so cautious. Sometimes plans don't always work, and you need to make the difficult decision on the spot. There can be no hesitation since your life depends on it. Don't ever forget that your father is also very strong and has the protection of the fates. I know. Apollo gently stroked her hands. If the need arises, I will not hesitate to ascend. Hecate added with firmness. We'll deal with the consequences together. Apollo merely nodded, trying his best to restrain his pessimism from destroying the optimism of his love. He turned to the prophecy and uttered the last two lines together. Teneburs and night unite, raised while they're torn. Eternal darkness shall rise, a cosmic power born. Tenebris is another title of Erebus. Hecate spoke, her dark eyes gleaming with magic. Night obviously is Ant. She gave the two lines another glance and looked at him with relief. The final lines shouldn't be about you, Apollo. She paused, deciding not to tempt fate. At least not directly. Apollo examined the prophecy. How is the relationship between Erebus and Nyx? Hecate wasn't surprised by his question, though she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I am not certain. Ant never spoke about it. But I could tell their marriage wasn't out of love. Even all the children they had together turned out to be just pure concepts of the world, not actual living beings. Some had a slight conscience, such as the evils, but others, such as Hera and Either, did not even have that. They are now separated. Apollo frowned. Yes. Hecate nodded. For quite some time. Well, Apollo drummed his fingers on the table. Let's consult Nyx on the remaining prophecy, as it is better if we get the full picture of their situation before we finalize our guesses. Hecate concurred and then looked up at the night sky. Give me a few seconds, and I'll call Ant. No. Apollo stopped her. What? Hecate stared at him. I believe we've reached our daily quota of depressing subjects. Apollo said. And I want to resume what we just passed. Remember, the night is still young. Hecate glared at Apollo. Are you seriously suggesting we still have sex? No. Apollo wryly smiled. The prophecy snuffed out my growing libido. He took a breather. What I want is a good night's sleep with you after all the things that happened. Hecate looked at him for a moment, then nodded. As tiredness washed over her, her tensed shoulders slumped. Come on, then. She extended her hand to him, and he caught it. They made their way to their bed. As they entered their bed, Apollo finally suggested. We shall meet with Nyx after I get approvals for my Hope project. Don't worry, it won't take long. Whatever you say. Hecate hummed and opened her arms to him. But Apollo snorted and dragged her into his arms instead. Hecate merely pouted as she let him snuggle her into his embrace. They closed their eyes and entered the realm of Morpheus together. Chapter 70, A Fool's Love, 2. Next morning. The first rays of dawn illuminated Trier, the Sun City, in golden and orange palettes. The auric beams corralled in the heart of the city, in which Delphi, the headquarters of the Temple of the Eternal Blazing Sun, perched atop a divine mountain. Delphi is the epicenter of civilization and the earth. It was the birthplace of just about everything epical that shaped the civilization into what it is today, and it is still guiding the civilization along the appropriate path. The infamous maze of destiny lies in the center of Delphi, and within it was the personal solar of the Eternal Blazing Sun himself. And Apollo was there, reclining in his comfy chair. He was examining the report submitted by his angels while drinking coffee, his usual morning routine nowadays. The report focused on the changes in his civilization and faith over the previous month. There was nothing new to see, just the usual stuff, and, as a side note, not a single person had passed through the trails he had set up for the opportunity to become his new angel. Apollo sighed in disappointment and signed the report. He looked up to see Anastasia and Nicholas, his angels of order and twilight, standing before him, waiting for his commands. "Is there anything else?" he asked. Nicholas and Anastasia exchanged perceptive glances. Then his angel of order spoke up, her posture as taut as ever. "There has been a troubling development with one of your legacies, my lord." "Who?" Apollo raised his brows in curiosity. "Cadmus, son of Agenor and Telephassa." Anastasia reported and stared at Apollo. He motioned for her to continue. "He had arrived in Delphi yesterday to seek answers from the oracle about his missing sister. After hearing his report on the circumstances surrounding his sister's disappearance, we suspect divine intervention." Apollo thrummed his fingers on his table. "It was my father who kidnapped Cadmus' sister, Europa, to gratify his own desire." Anastasia and Nicholas shifted nervously in their places. The angel of order asked after a bout of silence. "What is your order, my lord?" "How does my mother feel about this?" Apollo asked back. "She wants to assist in his path regardless," Anastasia said. "Then, it is decided. Cadmus' fate is wrought with wisdom and war." Apollo nodded, finalizing. "Nevertheless, the Delphi oracle shall provide him with guidance on his path of destiny." Anastasia nodded, a wave of relief pouring over her as her ever-strenuous posture melted. Apollo then raised his brows and looked at Nicholas. Nicholas said, "My lord." He took a breather. "Since last night, the underworld has become different." "Different?" Apollo frowned. "Last night, that couldn't be a coincidence. Underworld was a place even he couldn't pry through since it is connected to the realms of three primordials, Nyx, Erebus, and Tartarus. Darkness and night." Nicholas put it subtly. "They are confronting each other." Apollo sighed inwardly. His mind flashed back to the last two lines of the prophecy. "Teneburs and night unite, raised while torn. Eternal darkness shall rise, a cosmic power born." It is as he feared. His battle with his father will not be the only one that will determine the fate of the universe. Erebus and Nyx. Apollo thrummed his fingers on the armrest. Despite the concealment of destiny, they must have somehow sensed the impending fate since the prophecy involves them, or it could be that the concepts of night and darkness are simply responding to destiny, or... He had a lot of guesses. But one thing was certain, allying with him gave Nyx a real chance at freedom. Their alliance was entirely based on leaps of faith, totally not the best kind. He was also not certain that he could help her with the limitations on her divinity. But here he was becoming the primary cause behind it. Death's words flashed through his mind, "Your every action and choice has an impact on the grand scheme of things. You may not realize it right now, but it has an influence on everything in the substratum of reality." He was gradually realizing what it truly meant. Apollo looked at Nicholas and Anastasia, who were patiently waiting for his next order without interrupting his thoughts. He fixed his gaze on Nicholas. "Just keep an eye on the situation, Nicholas." "Yes, my lord." Nicholas unequivocally accepted his order. "Anything else?" Apollo inquired, his hands on his chin. "My lord." Anastasia inquired. "What about Cynthia and Castor?" "Their mission. They will be returning soon." Apollo stated. "Their task is nearly finished." Speaking of their task, he continued. "I am leaving for Omnipotent City for the Council of Godheads by tonight in relation to its matter. If any problems arise on Earth while I am away, pray to me immediately." "Yes, my lord." They said it in unison, bowing to him. "You can leave." Apollo dismissed them. He took out his sketchbook and pencil. He had promised Melpomene, the muse of tragedy, a drawing after he lost in a game with her last week. Apollo placed the pencil on his book and stared blankly at it for a few minutes. The sunshine in his solar deepened, bathing him in auric tones. He sighed, frustrated. Melpomene's drawing has to wait. He couldn't find inspiration. It was embarrassing, he knows, after all, he was the god of art. But he couldn't concentrate on the drawing with the lines of his prophecy buzzing in his head. Apollo sat back in his chair, his sketchbook on the table. He took a half-empty cup of coffee in his hand and began drinking it while allowing his thoughts to float away. The reason he was so concerned about the prophecy of destiny is because of what it truly symbolized. As the god of prophecy, he understood that better than anyone. A prophecy does more than merely foretell the future, it shapes it. Once a prophecy is spoken, it will be fulfilled in one way or another. It is a seed that is planted in the stream of time, which will bloom into the tree of future. You might be thinking, if prophecy could be used to manipulate the future, it could control fate itself in retrospect. Why aren't you making your own prophecies already? It might just solve all of your problems, Apollo. If only everything was that simple. Apollo exhaled a sigh. His divinity was insufficient, he needed a destiny-related authority to accomplish this. And as if that were even possible with the fates breathing down his neck. Returning to his prophecy, it is not binding, but the core principles he devised about it are still eternal. A prophecy is both a blessing and a curse, regardless. And he truly had no idea what to make of destiny's intervention. Everything considered, it should be help from destiny. But, as the saying goes, nothing comes without a price. Apollo sipped the last of his coffee and traced the edges of the empty cup with his fingers. The coffee is actually brewed by Hecate. He had been teaching her how to cook and brew during their free time while he prepared their breakfast. They had their brunch and arrived at Delphi together. Hecate went to her wizard tower to begin her preparations for his request to cast a universal spell, while he teleported to his solar to review the report submitted by his angels. As he was musing about his wonderful morning, Calliope, the muse of poetry, materialized in front of the door and knocked. "My Musagetes." Her voice was like a lullaby, filling the solar with serenity. Apollo turned to her, his thoughts restrained. "Calliope, come in." The 9 muses were his attendants. They share some of his responsibilities and duties over civilization. He and the muses were the progenitors of all art, music, and literature in Western civilization. They give humans the spark of inspiration, guiding them from the shadows. Along with him, Anastasia, and Themis, the muses contributed to the creation of law and order in human civilization. They even got involved with Athena's institutions as well as Hermes' administration of commerce and trade. In a nutshell, human civilization is truly just a big group project of the gods and goddesses. He, Hermes, and the 9 muses got together many nights over the years to brainstorm for ideas on the proper and ordered development of human civilization, though they spent most of the time just playing new and ridiculous games Hermes had invented. His little brother's imagination is truly limitless. He wouldn't be surprised if Hermes rose to become the god of games in the future. Back to the 9 muses, they wield even more power over Western civilization than the majority of gods. Only he, Athena, Hermes, and Hestia surpassed them. Calliope walked into the solar, fiddling with the hem of her pure white gown. She was exuding a great deal of nervous energy. "Take a seat." Apollo pointed to the chair in front of him. "And tell me what happened. Are you still facing a block in your poetry?" "No," Calliope said as she sat down in the seat. "I got through it," she said dreamily. "I found my inspiration." Apollo knew all too well about the dreamily look that Calliope had in her oceanic blue eyes when she uttered, "My inspiration." He perked up. "So who is the lucky one who gave you inspiration?" Calliope did her hardest to conceal her blush. "My Musagetes," she said, gathering her courage. "I'm actually here to consult with you on this." "You've come to the right place." Apollo smiled. "Tell me, I am all ears." "I want your blessing." Calliope smiled dreamily. "In order to court him." Apollo immediately blessed her. "You have it." He paused. "If you truly believe he is the one for you, go ahead and court him." Calliope chewed her lower lip and fiddled with the hem of her gown again. "What?" Apollo frowned, sensing her anxiety and uncertainty. "Is he not?" "No." Calliope cut in right away. "He is the one, Musagetes." She took a deep breath. "It's just his identity that bothers me." "Who is he, Calliope?" Apollo pressed, even though he already knew who Calliope's super-sensitive and super-secretive boyfriend was. "Morpheus," Calliope uttered. "Dream, huh?" Apollo arched his brow. "I can't say I am not impressed." He looked her up and down with pride. "You managed to woo an endless, Calliope." "Stop teasing me, Musagetes." Calliope placed her hands over her crimson face. "We had only seen each other a few times. Nothing has happened yet, even though he is so sweet and loving in his own way." "Dream being sweet and loving. Are you certain that we are talking about the same Morpheus, Calliope?" Apollo mused. But he didn't express his thoughts to her, instead he focused on her troubles and what she truly meant by his blessings. He sighed, "Calliope, I will not give you the false hope that you seek from me, that everything will be fine in your relationship with Dream. Apollo looked at her in the eyes as she listened with rapt attention. Dream is an endless. You are indeed right to feel troubled over his identity. And relationship with an endless more often than not ends in tragedy. They are beings of such power that all of their relationships with lower beings are always fraught with difficulties and uncertainties, whether they intended it or not. She flinched at his words, but if you love Dream and he also truly loves you back, then go for it with all your heart, since that's all that matters. I don't understand, am I mustaches? Calliope said, her voice quivering. Are you encouraging or discouraging me? Neither. Apollo shook his head. I only want you to be fully aware of what you are getting yourself into. In the end, Calliope, the choice is yours. After a few moments of heavy and deliberative silence, Calliope nodded firmly, her eyes as clear than ever. I have made my choice. Do tell me how it went. Apollo smiled reassuringly. I will. Calliope stood up from her seat. Her figure gradually faded away into light particles. However, Calliope suddenly turned to Apollo. Do I still have your blessing, my Musagetes? She inquired, as if certain he was already aware of her decision. Silly girl, Apollo gently chided. You always have my blessings. Calliope smiled fleetingly before fading in the shrinking brilliance of glitter. Apollo peered at the fading light particles in the air. Love truly makes a fool out of everyone. He exhaled a heavy sigh filled with emotions. He then took the empty sketchbook and began work on his next masterpiece, dedicated to Melpomene, the muse of tragedy. Apollo was so engrossed in his drawing that he lost track of time until Hecate jolted him out of it. It's time, Apollo. As she walked into the solar, her eyes were drawn to his sketchbook. Is it already? He looked back. The twilight sun was setting on the horizon. You lose track of time while drawing. Hecate noted. It has to be a masterpiece then. My love, Apollo turned towards her and flashed a brilliant smile. My every work of art is a masterpiece. Hecate snorted. Let me see it. It's not finished yet. Apollo tucked his sketchbook into his desk drawer. Does it at least have a title? Hecate hummed. A Fool's Love. Apollo started at Hecate. Hecate returned his stare in silence for a moment before asking quietly. Is it about us? No. Apollo shook his head. It's about the folly of love. He rose from his seat and approached Hecate. You could only truly understand what I want to convey after I finish my painting. Apollo reached out his hand to her. Art is just that way. Hecate took his hand in hers and smiled melancholily. We, in the beginning, were in fool's love. Yes. Apollo said subtly. Nevertheless, that didn't end in tragedy. Hecate picked up on his tone. What happened today? Apollo said. I will fill in with you later. He dragged her out of the solar. Come on, now. Let's set off to the omnipotent city, the heaven of the heavens. Chapter 71, Omnipotent City. It was built billions of years ago, after the war of the elder gods, from the rubble of rock of creation and the embers of fire that lit the first stars. It was built by Mother Earth and Mother Magic as a place of divine fellowship, a place where gods from all corners of reality would forever be welcome. Here, eternal treaties are signed and sacred covenants are sworn that save the lives of trillions. Here, gods are married and tied. Here, galaxies are born and battered. Here is the home of the Parliament of the Pantheons and the High Holy Court. The Genesis Bazaars and the Hall of All-Knowing. The nebula-sized jewels of the universal crown. Here in the center of infinity lies the heaven of heavens, a sight that no mortal eye will ever see. Here is the omnipotent city, the nexus of all the gods. Here Apollo and Hecate had come seeking an audience with the highest court of the universe, the Council of Godheads. Apollo and Hecate traversed vast bridges that led to floating celestial palaces and towering statues. The air was thick with divinity and sanctification. As far as the eye could see, the city was teeming with gods, goddesses, divine spirits, immortal creatures, and fabled races from all pantheons. It was overflowing with activity since it served as a link between all of the divine realms of the pantheons. Though the city was slowly turning quiet, Apollo and Hecate proceeded to the grandest hall in the center of the city. From all corners of the divine city, divine gazes were cast on them, and some beings even teleported away to their own pantheons to spread the news of their arrival. The Lady of Mysteries and the eternal blazing sun ignored everyone and strode forward hand in hand. The crowds of divine beings in their path naturally parted, with the appropriate amount of apprehension and curiosity visible in all of their divine eyes. Apollo knew he was famous in the divine realms, but he was still somewhat caught off guard by such a striking reception from the gods. At the very least, he was relieved that they weren't swarming him for autographs and photos. He and Hecate had arrived in Omnipotent City through the limitless labyrinth of destiny in Delphi. The legend that the paths in the labyrinth could lead anywhere in the universe is not fabricated, but you must be able to find the right path to your destination. That is where the real challenge and danger lie, as you could easily get lost in the infinity of destiny and end up in the worst parts of the cosmos. Though it was no problem for Apollo, he discovered their path with a simple divination and traveled to the omnipotent city with Hecate. In his divine eyes, the omnipotent city, the heaven of heavens, was much more than a city of palaces, larger and immeasurable than he imagined it to be, and as beautiful as any jewel, its auric towers burning like sun in the eternal darkness of night. It was a city of miracles, a city of dreams, a city of fantasy, a city of imagination, a city of power, a city of divine, the absolute symbol and representation of godhood and immortality. This was a place that symbolized everything that opposed mortality and transience. Mortals would never be able to witness its heavenly brilliance, since the sight of the divine city would melt their mortal flesh and condemn their souls to eternal damnation. Apollo was surprised. The divine power pulsing from the city almost felt limitless in his perception, to the point where he suspected it was a super-secret weapon built by Gaia and Ashtar against the eternal enemies of the divine, the Celestials. Hecate was looking around the city as well, her haunting, dark eyes stained with primal magic. It was their first trip to the heaven of heavens. He had never found the time to visit, and his love had spent almost all of her time before he came into her life researching magic in the underworld. As he pondered the divine city, Apollo dragged Hecate by hand, increasing their speed. Their route became more desolate with each step they took towards the celestial edifice, the Council of Godheads, in the center of the city. Obviously, their peaceful journey was soon disrupted. A beam of light cascaded down from the council to meet them, and out of it emerged a divine woman dressed in a green-brown gown that mirrored the tints of life. She radiated life, brightening the space around them. "I apologize for interfering with your journey." She made a light bow. "My name is Aurora, and I am the administrator of Omnipotent City." Aurora looked at them with her evergreen eyes. "It would be an honor to welcome you, eternal blazing sun, and your consort, Lady of Mysteries, to the divine city and guide you through its divine halls." "Thank you," Apollo said. "But we're only here for the council." Aurora nodded. "Well, then, I'll leave you with it." She pulled 2 small books from her gown and handed them to them. "If you have any doubts or questions, you can consult this book. It contains basic information about the omnipotent city." Hecate took the books, and Aurora bowed to them again, dissolving into blooming flowers. The Lady of Mystery stared at the falling flowers. "Did you feel it as well?" "Yes. The boundless aura of life." Apollo nodded. "She is a natural spirit, and not just any ordinary one. I reckon she is blessed of Gaia. Life." Hecate spoke quietly, her eyes gleaming with magic. Apollo dragged her forward before she could enter her dark witch state and summon her magic tower, beginning her new magical research into cracking the code of life right there and then. Something like this has happened many times in the past. His love can be spontaneous like that when it comes to knowledge and magic. Hecate merely pouted and focused on the books in her hands. She opened it and skimmed the first few pages, focusing solely on a hall of magic. Apollo glanced at it from the corner of his eyes. The book featured basic information on the city, such as its history and beginnings, palaces and ministries, bazaars and markets, and divine halls like the Hall of All-Knowing, Hall of the Lost, Hall of Murder, Hall of Magic, and Hall of All Life. Hall of All-Knowing. His eyes narrowed at that name. A dusty memory flashed through his mind. In the comics, Loki visited the Hall of All-Knowing with Thor, where he met now and then the Children of Eternity. Then they had lured the god of mischief into the House of Ideas. But it wasn't the real deal, but rather a project of the Children of Eternity, who were recording the stories of every hero in the multiverse. Maybe he should go to the Hall of All-Knowing the next time he comes here. Apollo thought to himself. He doesn't have much hope of finding anything, though, since his universe isn't 616, the main universe. Hecate abruptly shut the books, jolting him out of his reverie, and pointed to the front. "We are here." A massive palace supported by auric columns hundreds of meters high and bathed in eternal divine light rose before them. 2 colossal statues of divine women, as large as palaces, flanked the entrance that was led up by the stairs. They were Mother Earth and Mother Magic. Gaia, the Earth Mother, was depicted as a plump and beautiful lady with ears of wheat growing from her feet and surrounded by spring water. Her dress appears to flutter, and embedded in it are various herbs and flowers, as well as depictions of various animals. She appears to be tall and holy, with a white halo around her head. Mother Magic, Ashtar, was depicted as a stern and dainty woman holding a book with the symbol of omniscience, a triangle with a single eye in the center. Her gown was embroidered with faint mystic runes that were woven together to form a beautiful artwork that appeared to be both sanctified and brilliant, and a star-shaped halo decorated her head with dazzling points of light. Apollo squinted at the statues. He had the strange feeling that the elder goddesses were staring back at him, their sacred glow on their statues intensifying by the second, as if they were going to burst out and greet him. "Hello, Apollo." He looked at Hecate, who was also looking at the statues, but she didn't seem to notice the anomalies. "What?" she asked, raising her brows. "I think the elder goddesses are staring back at me." Apollo said, returning his gaze to the statues. Obviously, it has returned to normal. It must be an illusion created by their remnant power. Hecate guessed as she placed the guidebooks within her personal dimension. It has to be. Apollo nodded. Or they were literally gazing at you through their statues. Hecate continued with a fleeting smile. After all, who are you? The eternal blazing sun. Look, Apollo said proudly, looking her up and down. Who finally managed to develop a sense of humor? Hecate whined as he dragged her to the stairs, on which they began their ascent to the golden Council of Godheads. The stars in the night shimmered as they stood alone before the door to the council, which was even more massive than everything else in the omnipotent city. Do you want to come? Apollo inquired. Do you want me to come? Hecate asked back, tightening their hands. Go, Apollo stared at Hecate. To the Hall of Magic. I can tell you really want to. I'll handle the approval. Hecate nodded and smiled brightly. Then she kissed him lightly and turned to face the stairs. Hecate. Apollo grumbled, accusingly looking at her. Hecate turned. What? She said, as realization dawned on her. You don't need all the best or good luck, she continued emphatically. I know you will succeed, Phoebus. Oh. Apollo drew her into his embrace and kissed her fervently. I love you. I love you too. Hecate smiled. Apollo kept watch over her as she descended the stairs and vanished between the buildings after she turned and smiled farewell. Then he looked at the hefty door and went towards it. He willed his body to grow with each step, and by the time he stood in front of the door, he was already 100 meters tall, adjusting himself to the size and structure of the hall. Apollo pushed the door open, unveiling a brilliant burst of light that illuminated the entire omnipotent city. He entered the light without hesitation, and the door immediately closed with a rumble upon his entrance. Apollo stood in front of Dais, surrounded by rising circular platforms atop which divine thrones brimmed with power and might. The starry light poured in through the glass dome supported by marble columns. A cosmic tree pulsing with streams of light was in the center of the dais, and within its core was a faint projection of Earth. The lights of creation pulsing through the tree coursed out of the green planet. This was the Council of the Godheads, the highest holy court of the universe. It is ordained to convene only in the case of pressing matters affecting the fate of the gods and the universe. The cosmic tree in the center is a projection of the world tree, which serves as the pillar of creation that supports the universe. And at the center of it all was the Earth, his home, the hub of creation and genesis. There was a reason why the gods, despite their immense power, did not attempt to conquer the universe for themselves. The Earth was the center of existence, and that's all they ever needed. It was said that, at the beginning of creation, the power of Dunamis Demiurgos bathed his home, shifting the celestial axis of the cosmos to Earth. And from this ocean of creation, the elder gods arose into existence. Does this imply that I am also related to presence? And why have I never thought of this before? Apollo mused as information about the history of the elder gods flashed through his mind. But then he shook his head, putting a stop to his thoughts about his weird family tree. Apollo raised his hand and summoned his eternal spear. Then he banged it on the ground, applying some power. A wave erupted and spread across the Golden Council and Divine City, and even into all of the pantheons and god realms. Rumble. And the heavens trembled under his might. With that, Apollo declared, willing his voice to resound like rolling thunder throughout the divine realms of the gods. I, Phoebus Apollo, request an audience with the Council of Godheads. There was a moment of resounding silence, and then shimmering figures began to materialize in the divine thrones on the platform, exuding a collectively terrifying divine aura that could shatter galaxies in turn. Faced with the Sky Fathers, Apollo assumed his divine form, his hair growing long and white. A white halo adorned his head, and 12 massive white wings sprouted from his back, illuminating the entire council with gentle, infinite light. Hope. Immediately, the Council of Godheads exploded with astonished voices and chaotic whispers. Chapter 72, Council of Godheads. Hope. Immediately, the Council of Godheads exploded with astonished voices and chaotic whispers. Taking advantage of the chaos, Apollo studied the council with his brilliant eyes of hope. The members of the council were the sole leaders of the pantheons: Hutzilfli, the Sky Father of the Aztec pantheon; Enlil, the Sky Father of the Mesopotamian pantheon; Buluku, the Sky Father of the Voda/African pantheon; Hodiak, the Sky Father of the Northern pantheon; Istamna, the Sky Father of the Mayan pantheon; Svarig, the Sky Father of the Slavic pantheon, and so on. And in front of them all were 6 thrones, each symbolizing a superior statue and ranking among the pantheons of the divine realms. The 6 thrones were occupied by the most powerful of all members: Amaterasu, the Sky Mother of the Shinto pantheon; Indra, the Sky Father of the Hindu pantheon; Jade Emperor, the Sky Father of the Heavenly Court; Ra, the Sky Father of the Egyptian pantheon; Zeus, the Sky Father of the Olympian pantheon; and Odin, the Sky Father of Asgard. Image here. Amaterasu was a slim, fit young woman with long, white hair that fell to her waist and large breasts. She is dressed in traditional kimono robes engraved with sun symbols. Her enchanting and noble face twisted with distaste and a slight shock at the sight of his divine form, but she quickly concealed it, assuming a dignified expression. Image here. Indra wore a magnificent armor streaked with lightning blots. A golden, intricate helmet adorned his head. He had 4 hands covered in auric bangles. His expressions were stern and indifferent, and he only raised his brows as he saw his hope form. Image here. Jade Emperor was a middle-aged man with a long, sagely goatee and a thin mustache. He was dressed in long, flowing robes and a hat with 13 pearl-strung tassels. His already squinted eyes squinted even more as he looked at Apollo. Image here. Ra was a man with a hawk head, wearing the golden disc on top of his head, with a serpent wrapped around the base of the disc like a crown. He was dressed in Egyptian armor, and his skin glowed with light. His vertical eyes narrowed as he scrutinized Apollo. Image here. As usual, Zeus was tall, imposing, and muscular, with shoulder-length black hair and a gray and black beard. He wore a white chiton with gold threads, and there wasn't much surprise in his brilliant electric blue eyes as he gazed at Apollo's hope divine form. Image here. Odin was one-eyed and long-bearded. He was decked in golden armor, a red clock, and an auric helmet. He wielded Gungnir, the sharpest spear in the universe. His form exuded a terrifying aura of power. Power. Apollo analyzed. In terms of power, he intuitively felt his father, Ra, and Odin was more powerful than Amaterasu, Indra, and the Jade Emperor. Their divine auras were more condensed and compressed than the other 3. He looked high. Many Skyfathers in the back had surprised and greedy expressions, though they were trying their best to hide it from him. Apollo wasn't surprised by their reaction. Hope was so valuable to the gods. After all, many legends in the divine realms told of the possibility of defying fate with hope. As Apollo was musing on the council, the All-Father raised his Gungnir and slammed it on the ground. Silence. The chaos in the council readily died down. The Skyfathers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs as the heavens rumbled once more under the might of Odin. A bout of heavy silence passed. Zeus shattered it with his thunderous voice. Son, what is the meaning of this impertinence? Oh. Amaterasu giggled, her hands over her mouth. Isn't it obvious, Zeus? He is your son, she said, looking between Zeus and Apollo. Impertinence runs in your family's ichor after all. Murmurs and whispers filled the council as the celestial goddess of the sun threw a jibe at the entire Olympian pantheon. Zeus glared at Amaterasu, his body erupting with streaks of white lightning that charged the air. My lady, Apollo interrupted before his father could fire his own jibe at her. We are in the most powerful council of the universe, where the fate of gods and the universe are decided, he gently reminded. This is the divine sanctuary of unity created by Mother Earth and Mother Magic themselves. He locked his gaze on her fiery eyes. So, my lady, please refrain from expressing your feelings and differences so openly in this holy realm. Apollo may be impertinent. Ra spoke calmly, his voice carrying the might of the sun. Nevertheless, he is not wrong, Amaterasu. Amaterasu shot Apollo a withering glare. Apollo, you are indeed right, she spread her hands. We are in the most holy court of the universe, and any blasphemy against it should be addressed immediately. She cocked her head, a sly smile on her crimson lips. Including your impertinence. Let's hear the side of my son, Zeus said, before we judge anything. Oh, please. Amaterasu laughed and threw her hands up. Do you honestly believe his pesky issues will be worthy of the council? My lady. Apollo said, infusing his voice with the divinity of prophecy. My pesky issue affects the fate of the universe. His voice resounded with the weight of destiny. After all, it is indeed the truth, on the council, silencing everyone. Odin lightly clanged his spear on the ground. The boy is not lying. His wisdom-filled eye peered at Apollo. Let's hear him. The council swayed in approval with the words of Odin. Even Amaterasu didn't object, merely gazing at Apollo inquisitively. Apollo began. For those of you who don't know me, I am Phoebus Apollo, the eternal blazing sun, and the bringer of light. But of course I need no introduction to you, the Sky Lords of the universe. He addressed the pantheon leaders calmly and presented his case. As you can see, I've just recently ascended to the position of God of Hope. The 12 brilliant wings behind him swayed. And I intend to fulfill my duty by bringing hope not only to Earth but to the most of the universe as well. Bold. Hutsilfli hollered. Audacious. Enel cried. The council immediately erupted in clamor, and astonished eyes were directed at Apollo. Silence. Odin thundered, his expression as serene as ever. Let him finish. I have devised a plan to achieve it. Apollo continued calmly as the Sky Lords went silent. The project of hope. He snapped his fingers, willing the information of his project into existence in the form of books, which flew into the hands of all the rulers. His plan was inspired by the DC lanterns. He intended to establish his own cosmic force. He called them the Lightbringers. The force draws power from hope that resides in their hearts as well as in the universe, and they also safeguard it against the dark forces of cosmos. His true intention was to use them to reduce the collateral damage from the battle of the gods on the universe and save as many civilizations as possible. The conflict between gods is just too destructive and ruinous, so it pushed him to seek a means to limit the devastation, especially since the approaching war of gods will be unlike anything the cosmos has ever seen, and the Lightbringers were the solution. The might of hope is unbounded and unbridled. You could perform miracles with its power. The only limitations are your imagination and your will. You are eligible to join the Lightbringers and become a universe guardian as long as you are capable of bringing great hope. Though the Lightbringers may not appear to be much on the cosmic scale, it was better than doing nothing and witnessing billions of civilizations and millions of galaxies collapse under the power of gods. This book contains basic information about my project, as well as my plans and objectives for it. Apollo pointed to the books in the hands of the rulers. And all I ask of the council is your representation and backing in the Universal Council. Apollo finished and stared silently at the Sky Lords. They promptly opened the books and began reading them thoroughly. Amaterasu gave it a brief glance. This is ridiculous. Zeus grumbled. Amaterasu. No. Amaterasu cut in sharply. This is truly ridiculous. Phoebus Apollo, have you considered the ramifications of your unrestrained force on the order of the universe? She asked. You intend to employ beings from all civilizations if they have the potential to bring great hope. Have you considered how their home civilizations will react to your intrusion? You want to expand your Lightbringers to become the guardians of the universe, but their very existence disrupts the delicate order of the universe. And you want our representation and support to convene the Universal Council to hear your case, but the advanced civilizations of the universe will never accept such a free and unconstrained force to exist, no matter how many terms that you make to not interfere in their administration. They will immediately perceive you as a threat the moment you present your project to their council. Amaterasu finished, hurling the book back at Apollo. What will you do then, Apollo? Retaliate against them for rejecting your absurd project. The council swayed in agreement with the words of the celestial goddess of the sun. Murmurs and glares, as well as jests and jeers, were directed at Apollo. Phoebus Apollo. Odin declared neutrally. Your plan does have an impact on the fate of the universe. It has the potential to disrupt the cosmic order and plunge the universe into chaos and war. The advanced civilizations have strong feelings about us. They never liked our existence and have made no attempt to conceal it. As Amaterasu stated, they will never judge your project impartially. And you'll be there to represent us, and if you choose to retaliate against them, you'll drag us into your chaos. So think and consider carefully before making your argument on this. The Allfather peered at Apollo. Because if not, the council will no longer entertain your case. Under the piercing gazes of the Sky Fathers, Apollo looked at his book in his hand for a moment before making his case to the highest council. I recognize the follies in my project. He spoke, each word bearing the weight of the sun. It will indeed not be accepted by the Universal Council due to the freedom that comes with hope. But I am confident they will reconsider once they realize the truth about their place and significance in the universe. So you do intend to use force, then? Amaterasu cut in harshly. No. Apollo shook his head, I intend to do no such thing. By realize, I mean show them a glimpse of what is to come, the second dark age of the universe. The council was deafeningly quiet. Many Sky Lords shifted in their seats nervously. Whether they want to or not, they will be forced to change their minds, because even their most advanced technologies will be meaningless in the coming era. His bright gaze swept over each of them one by one. Some looked him in the eyes, while others avoided him. I also understand your reservations about my project. In response to that, Apollo asserted. I solemnly swear under my name to bear all the consequences and repercussions of my project. The very fabric of reality shimmered, acknowledging his oath. The council exploded with astonished voices. A vow on your name is the harshest oath in the divine realms as it is tied to your name, and breaking the oath will result in the worst punishment known to gods. You will lose your name and identity forever. I don't know whether you call me brave or foolish. Ra said, leaning forward in his golden throne. However, I recognize and respect your conviction. Phoebus Apollo. Jade Emperor said, let's put aside the consequences brought by your project and focus on you. His black eyes scrutinized Apollo. Are you sure what you're getting yourself into? The Universal Council consists of the most advanced civilizations in the universe. They each have their own way of thinking, their own culture, their own morals, their own laws, their own ideologies, and their own beliefs, all forged from millions of years of development. In the past, it was considered a miracle that beings with such disparities could find a delicate common ground in the name of the Universal Council. He pointed to Apollo. You will submit your project for approval to such a unique group. So, do you still believe that everyone will change their minds? Apollo peered at the Jade Emperor. No, he replied calmly. I recognize that there will still be opposition since some beings may think in ways that are radically different from our perspective. He took a pause. However, I will not impose hope on the civilizations of the universe. In the end, it is their choice. The Lightbringers will not be involved in any situation where they are not wanted. In the infinite universe, there is a limit to what one can aim to protect. As for the Lightbringers chosen from those civilizations that decided to forsake my cosmic force, I will give them a choice to either abandon their home or their eligibility, or even give them an opportunity to convince their home civilization to recognize the Lightbringers and then join the force. That will even be their acceptance test. You really thought it all out. Indra smiled. There is still much to consider. Apollo said humbly. However, this is the basis of my cause and project. And I present it to the council, requesting your representation and support in convening the Universal Council. Odin looked around the council for any more voices of dissent, and the Sky Lords remained silent in their thrones, acknowledging Apollo. The Council of Godheads recognizes your cause, Phoebus Apollo. The Allfather said, and I call for the vote of approval. All in favor. Indra, Zeus, Ra, Baluku, Svarog, and others raised their hands. All in disfavor. Amaterasu, the Jade Emperor, Hutzilfli, Enel, Hodiak, Istamna, and others raised their hands. The vote was tied. Everyone turned their attention to Odin, the only Sky Father who had not yet voted. Finally, Odin arose from his throne. I vote in favor. He slammed his Gungnir against the ground. Your plan has been approved by the Council of Godheads. Odin pointed his spear at Apollo, who looked back calmly. We will use our power to call the Universal Council, and you, Phoebus Apollo, will represent us. The entire Council of Godheads brightened and erupted with streams of light that shot into the infinity of the universe at a speed that broke all of the material laws of the universe. It was heading towards the hub of the Universal Council, Worlorn, which was billions of light years away from Earth. Apollo looked at the streams of light shooting into the darkness of the space, his shoulders slumping ever so slightly. It would be a lie to say he wasn't nervous or tense during his presentation. After all, there were numerous possibilities of failure. But everything went smoothly, and he received the approval and representation of the Sky Lords. Now comes the real challenge. He peered ahead, sensing a tint in his awareness. A flash of light erupted from the tip of the Gungnir, morphing into the emblem of the Council of Godheads, green earth encased in the world tree. Apollo caught the symbol in his hand and gave the council a light bow. Thank you for your time and consideration. A/N, I am moving from my old home to my new home in the next few days, and it is also the holiday season and the new year. So I am taking a break for at least 2 weeks, but I will still try to write if I find time. Anyway, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.